Chapter 25. His figure flew backward and fell into the lake. No one knew if he was dead or alive. It turned out that the old man in the lake also carried a blade. Both he and Bai Hur had two-handed blades. One blew snow and the other raised waves. Which one was more powerful? Su Fengnian, whose eyes were blurred, clicked his tongue and said, "Is this old man invincible? If I had known that masters were so powerful, I would have listened to Su Zhao's advice and practiced martial arts." Old Huang turned his head and shook his head with a silly smile. "Not invincible, not invincible." Su Fengnian looked at him attentively. He saw that the chains on the old man's hands were rooted in his bones and connected together. It was not an ordinary binding. This was too terrifying. Who would be so obsessed with martial arts and conceited to the point of becoming one with the blade? What if the blade was controlled by someone? Wouldn't it be extremely painful? Old Kuei leaped into a pavilion with two locks and two sabers. He waved his sabers lightly, and the pavilion, which had cost him quite a lot of silver, collapsed with a loud rumble, almost turning into fine powder. Old Kuei looked up to the sky and laughed loudly, his white hair fluttering in the wind, making him look like a llama. The remaining 4 guards of the tide-listening pavilion moved together. They formed a triangle and stood far away with a solemn expression. On the top of Mount Qingliang, de Zhuguo, Su Xiao, sat on a wooden bench and looked at the lake on the mountainside. He held a red clay teapot made by a famous craftsman, but it was filled with green ant wine. Beside him stood his adopted son, Yuan Zhuozong. Zhuoxiong squinted his phoenix eyes. Su Xiao chuckled. "How many moves can you block?" Yuan Zhuozong, who was riding a white horse and wielding a silver spear and killing people on the battlefield, said softly, "Father, Zhuoxiong wants to try." De Zhuguo shook his head. "Forget it. Someone will take care of this monster downstairs. He can't hurt Fengnian." In the corridor on the second floor of the tide-listening pavilion, a man in a white robe stood in front of the railing with a winter blade at his waist. He looked at it for a moment, then put his finger on the hilt of the knife and pushed it out an inch, then retracted it back into its sheath. He rubbed it back and forth, then turned around and went back upstairs. Not only that, even Li Yishan, the most important advisor of the prince's mansion, walked out of the dark room. He clasped his hands behind his back and quietly observed the once-in-a-decade spectacle. As if the sunlight was too dazzling, he raised his hand to cover his eyes and muttered to himself, "Jian Zhou Huang, Chu Kuangnu, do we have to tear down countless pavilions again?" The old man did not pay any attention to the guards. In this world, there were very few people who could make him take them seriously. He only roared, "Ninth brother Huang, come out and die." Su Fengnian was shocked. "Old Ninth Huang. Old Huang, are they calling you? Don't tell me you have a grudge with this old man." Old Huang reached out and tore off the tattered cloth, revealing the long rosewood box that made Su Fengnian's heart palpitate. He turned his head and smiled. He still looked like he had no front teeth. Every time Su Fengnian saw this scene, he always wondered if the old servant would let the wine leak into his mouth when he drank the yellow wine. The old man obviously saw the old coachman standing at the bow with the box on his back. His white hair danced in the wind and his face was ferocious. When Su Fengnian was so nervous that he did not even dare to breathe, old Huang reached out his withered hand and stroked the wooden box. He did not forget to turn his head and smile foolishly. He raised his head and made a gesture of pouring wine into his mouth, saying, "Young master, that..." Su Fengnian laughed angrily, "Look at you. Don't you have the demeanor of a master? If you really win by stepping on dog shit, I'll treat you to 100 jars of Dragon Cliff sunken vat yellow wine." The coachman, who was called Old Ninth Huang by Old Kuei and Jian Zhou Huang by Li Yishan, smiled faintly. In that instant, Su Fengnian's eyes seemed to be dazzled. Old Huang was no longer simple and foolish. Instead, it was replaced by an indescribable feeling. He only felt that this old servant, who was as immovable as a mountain, was actually more arrogant than old Kuei, who carried a saber. Among the 3 large plaques in the tide-listening pavilion, one of them was, Chi Rush Fighting Bull. It referred to the supreme sword aura that existed only in ancient records and was in fact purely illusory. Su Fingnian thought that if this old Huang really knew how to wield the sword, he would be worthy of a big white, 2 big whites, and even 1,000 big whites. What a scoundrel! Old Huang didn't move, but the wooden box hummed like a dragon's cry. It wasn't ear-piercing, but it shook one's soul. Su Fingnian was dumbfounded. Could it be that this old Huang who had been stealing chickens and touching dogs with him for 3 years was really an expert? Sword 1. Old Huang, who had been silently reciting these 2 words, stepped lightly on the bow of the boat. Su Fingnian's small boat with a black awning moved back toward the shore. It was abnormally stable. The small boat gently glided backward, creating ripples in the water. Su Fingnian gazed at old Huang's skinny figure in the distance as he walked on the waves. The side of the red sandalwood box opened, and a long sword rushed out of it. De Zhugua, who had stood up on the mountain peak, and Li Shan, who was in the tide-listening pavilion, said at the same time, Sword 1, Dragon Snake. The old man with the blade laughed impudently, Good, good, good. Old Ninth Huang, I've been waiting for you for so many years. Today, Grandpa will break your 9 swords and let you have 1 less sword to carry. Su Fingnian, a layman, was so annoyed that he wanted to kill someone. He knew that this was a peak confrontation between the top experts of Jianghu, but in his eyes, it was just a blade against a sword. He couldn't see anything special about it. It was even less exciting than the duel between the old man with double blades and Grandpa Wei. The only thing he could see was that another sword had flown out of the red sandalwood box. Su Fingnian didn't know that even the best moves couldn't escape the 4 words, back to basics. De Zhugua forgot to drink. He held his wine cup and sighed softly, Sword 2. Li Shan, who was in the tide-listening pavilion, slowly spat out 2 words, twin lotus flowers on 1 stalk. The 2 on the mountain and halfway up the mountain clearly had a tacit understanding. 1 sword became 2 swords, 2 swords became 3 swords. Sword 3. 3 Jin. 3 swords filled the sky with sword light, enveloping the world. Old man with double blades and old Huang with 3 swords. They were practically half gods and half immortals. Su Fingnian sat down on the boat and laughed foolishly, You deserve a reward. These are all F*King top-notch skills. Chapter 26. If Su Fingnian heard what his father and master said, he would definitely teach old Huang a lesson. In the future, when choosing the names of the sword moves, he should pay more attention. 3 swords out of the sheath was 3 Jin, so 4 swords would be 4 Jin. At that moment, Su Fingnian wanted to ask old Huang how many compartments there were in the red sandalwood sword case, and how many swords were in it. The battle ended quickly and unexpectedly. This made His Royal Highness, who had not watched to his heart's content, feel even more unsatisfied. He thought to himself, Old man, old Huang, you 2 heroes don't feel bad about the palace's architecture. Just tear it down. You don't need to pay for it, right? But life is not as you wish. Su Fingnian could not rush up crying and begging the 2 masters to continue the battle. Swords have no eyes, life and death is one's own responsibility. Afterwards, after an expert's explanation, His Royal Highness learned that in the battle, old Huang with the case on his back had used 3 swords in the end, a total of 6 moves. It was definitely not like what the storyteller said with his mouth full of saliva in the tea house. The battle between the 2 unparalleled masters must have been dark for several days and nights. In short, it was not shocking, and ghosts and gods would not cry. At that moment, the old man with the sword sat in the dilapidated pavilion with only the base of the platform left. His 2 swords were stabbed into the ground. His face was ruddy, and his hair was white. He shook his head and said, "Let's not fight today." The short and thin old Huang with the case on his back stood on the long embankment. He rubbed his hands and then put them into his sleeves. But in the hearts of most of the spectators, it was extremely absurd. This old coachman who could not even make a fart after being beaten a few times was really a real person who did not show his face to scare people. Su Fengnian was undoubtedly the most shocked. He did not know that it was old Huang who had single-handedly beaten the old man to the bottom of the lake. If not for that, would the great pillar of the country, Su Shao, be at ease and let his most beloved son travel 6,000 li? Every time his life was hanging by a thread, he still managed to keep his life. Sitting on the ground, the old man shouted to Su Fengnian, "Kid, give grandpa some wine and meat. After eating and drinking, I will fight with old Ninth Huang for 500 rounds. Whoever loses will go to the bottom of the lake." Su Fengnian could hear the old man's heroic voice from afar. After hesitating for a long time, he still ran to ask the steward to prepare a sumptuous meal. He specially prepared a whole roasted suckling pig and placed it in an oversized food box. Su Fengnian carried it and ran up the long embankment. His footsteps became slower and slower. When he passed by the coachman old Huang, he threw a glance at the old servant, who was still complaining that His Royal Highness had forgotten to reward him with a pot or two of dragon rock sunk vat. The old servant rubbed his cheeks to indicate that he was fine. Only then did Su Fengnian muster up the courage to step forward and place the food box on the ground in front of the old man. Just now, the steward didn't forget to give His Royal Highness a few crispy cucumbers. The old man didn't stand on ceremony. He tore off a pig leg and stuffed it into his mouth. His mouth was full of grease. After eating live carp with a fishy taste for more than 10 years, the 10-foot-tall old man clearly liked this exquisitely cooked suckling pig. Su Fengnian squatted in front of him and slowly nibbled on a cucumber. He was thinking of a touching opening speech. After all, they had been friends for more than 10 years. He had to make good use of it. In the past, when he entered the water to look at the old man, it was as if they were looking at each other in the underworld. Now that he was finally in the world of the living, he had to come up with a plan. Otherwise, he would be scared witless and take the risk to make such a big fuss. Moreover, he also had to be busy. It was not in line with His Royal Highness' style of doing things. Without waiting for Su Fengnian, whose eyes were secretly rolling around, to finish his little abacus, the old man bluntly said, "Back then, it was the King of Belyang's scheme and old Ninth Huang's strength that made me, your grandfather, live at the bottom of the lake and live a life worse than death. Today, you saved me, so we're even. I also exchanged blows with old Ninth Huang and turned his 5 broken swords into 4. As for Belyang Palace, your grandfather is kind and won't tear it down. Kid, don't expect your grandfather to repay your favor." Su Fengnian, who was staring blankly, thought to himself that he had met an opponent who was as thick-skinned as him. He carefully asked, "Old grandpa, there's wine and meat in the mansion, and old Huang will fight with you. Why don't you stay?" The old man sneered and said, "There are many masters in the world. After I defeat old Huang's 9th saber, your grandfather will go to Martial Emperor City and defeat the world's second best. If your grandfather isn't the world's best, then what am I? A small prince's mansion is not worthy of your grandfather's attention." Old Huang, who had taken off the red sandalwood sword case to sit on, put a blade of grass in his mouth and chewed carefully. He imitated His Royal Highness and rolled his eyes. Su Fengnian looked embarrassed. He had no experience dealing with a hero like the old man, who killed people as if they were chopping melons and vegetables. He did not know what to say. The last cucumber in his hand was snatched away by the old man. He bit off half of it, spat a few times, and threw it into the lake. The old man, who was busy dealing with a pig's trotter, glared at Su Fengnian and said, "Kid, you want to eat this tasteless thing?" Su Fengnian, whose face had been sprayed with saliva, lifted his sleeve and wiped it away. He asked tentatively, "Old Grandpa, can you help me teach someone a lesson?" "He's a martial granduncle from Mount Wudong, a master." The old man thought for a moment and nodded. "I've been indebted to you all these years. I've tasted some cooked food, but if you ask for more, your grandfather will beat you up. But if you want to fight and kill, your grandfather is willing. Wait until I defeat old Ninth Huang, then I'll leave immediately." Old Huang did not give him any face and slanted his mouth. He held the stalk of grass in his mouth and his old face was full of ridicule. The old man angrily shouted, "Old Ninth Huang, you don't accept it. If you don't accept it, let's fight again." Old Huang simply turned his body around and turned his back to the old man, out of sight, out of mind. Su Fengnian, who was covering his ears, felt a headache. If the old man had not promised to go to Mount Wudong to teach that bastard Taoist priest a lesson, he would have let old Huang beat this untactful old man to the bottom of the lake. In this lifetime, other than those servants who jumped into the lake to commit suicide, there would be no hope of seeing another living person again. Su Fengnian softly exclaimed in surprise. Since old Huang's skills were so valiant, why did he choose to go to Mount Wudong with the sword case on his back? Wouldn't it be easier to just bring old Huang, who was carrying the sword case, to Mount Wudong? Why did he have to look at the old man's face and listen to his roar? Su Fengnian weighed the pros and cons, his face was gloomy and uncertain. The old man's appearance was boorish, but his mind was as meticulous as hair. The whole suckling pig, including the meat and bones, entered his stomach. He patted his stomach in satisfaction and said with a hee-hee, "Child, as soon as I saw your eyes turn, Grandpa knew that you were thinking of something." "What, you want old Ninth Huang to throw me back to the bottom of the lake?" "To tell you the truth, it's easier to invite Buddha than to send Buddha away. If I hadn't fallen into Li Yuaning's evil scheme, even if I didn't defeat old Ninth Huang, Grandpa would still be able to come and go as I please." At the bottom of the lake, there were 4 iron balls weighing 4,000 catties. 2 of the twin sabers were poured into the balls, and that was how Grandpa was trapped. "Now that I have the twin sabers in my hands, the world is mine." "Waha, child, aren't you afraid?" His Royal Highness, who was being roared and spat again, squeezed out a smile and muttered, "How could I?" Fengnian's admiration for old Grandpa is like the great river flowing east, like the stars in the plains. The old man said with a smile that was not a smile, "Child, you're different from that butcher Su, you're more to my liking. Arrange a comfortable room for Grandpa, and prepare a table full of wine and meat." Su Fengnian stood up and said, "This is a small matter." Chapter 27. Old Huang spat out the grass root and said, "Not fighting anymore." The old man said arrogantly, "What's the hurry? You'll get to fight later." Old Huang carried the sword case on his back and said flatly, "Forget it if you don't want to fight. I'm going to the Martial Emperor City to get the Yellow Cottage back." The old man was shocked. "Really?" Old Huang nodded. The old man sighed and shook his head with a bitter smile, "Then I won't fight anymore. It's a waste of my energy." Su Fengnian was confused. He arranged the huge old man Yuanzhuazong, who was more than 9 feet tall, to stay in a yard. Su Fengnian went to the stable. Old Huang was carrying the sword case and a cloth bag. He was chatting with the date-red horse as if he was saying goodbye. Su Fengnian was surprised. "Old Huang, what's going on?" The old groom said softly, "I've been watching Chu Kuangnu at the bottom of the lake all these years. Since he's been released by the young master, there's nothing for me to do. I was defeated by the old monster Wang Xianji and left the Yellow Cottage sword in the Martial Emperor City. I couldn't let it go these years and wanted to get it back." Su Fengnian said bitterly, "Is it the giant sword stuck in the wall of the Martial Emperor City? The Yellow Cottage that ranks 4th in the top 10 famous swords?" Old Huang smiled and nodded. The Martial Emperor City was located at the edge of the Eastern Sea. The city was built with stones to watch the sea. Wang Xianji was almost 100 years old, but he had been famous for 80 years. He was a martial arts genius that only appeared once in 100 years. He was famous for not carrying any weapons when he was young. He always fought with one hand. At 25, he was promoted to the ranks of the Peerless Masters. At 40, he challenged the sword god Li Chungang and broke the wooden ox and horse that could cut iron like mud with 2 fingers. He was famous all of a sudden. Wang Xianji obviously had the qualifications to be the first in the world, but he claimed to be the second. This made the top 10 masters in the Wulin Jianghu ranked 11th. The first place had been vacant for 20 years. In the past 50 years, there were 2 peerless masters who used swords. The new sword god Dong Tai held a peach branch and fought with Wang Xianji 3 times. He neither won nor lost. He was ranked 3rd in the top 10 masters. The other one was elusive. People only knew that he was from Western Shu. He was a nameless swordsman. After 30 years of swordsmanship, he comprehended the way of the sword and traveled Jianghu alone. He collected all the famous swords in the world and put them into his sword box. The world only knew that he fought with someone and became famous. Although he lost and left a sword on the city wall, no one doubted that this mysterious swordsman did not lose honorably because he lost to the old and strong martial emperor city's master Wang Xianji. Who would have thought that such a swordsman who could shake 40 provinces with one sword was a coachman in Beiliang Palace? He talked and chatted with horses all day long. At most, he would ask His Royal Highness for a pot of yellow wine to satisfy his cravings. Therefore, when the old man heard that 9th brother Huang had returned to the martial emperor's city to challenge Wang Xianji, he knew that he could not beat him 10 years ago. Su Fengnian, who was holding a cucumber, smiled bitterly and said, "Old Huang, tell me, how many swords are in this sword box?" Everyone in the world is guessing. Old Huang, who had a few stalks of horse grass stuck to his head after lying in the stable for a while, scratched his head and said, "There are 3 levels and 6 compartments in the sword box. Originally, there were 6 of the 10 famous swords in the world, but now there are only 5. Su Fengnian was speechless. "Old Huang, you're an expert. Can you be any better?" Old Huang said naively, "If young master wants to play with swords, I'll leave 3 or 4 for you." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "No, I'd rather you carry 180 swords and stab that Wang Xianji into a hornet's nest. Then, when you go out to flirt with the heroines of Jianghu, I'll be proud to say that I stole chickens and ducks with you, Old Huang. Isn't that right, Old Huang?" Old Huang grinned foolishly. Old Huang, who had no front teeth, was so cute. How could it be the 9th saber, who was thousands of miles above an expert? Su Fengnian could not figure it out, so he decided not to think about it anymore. He asked the servants to prepare a pot of Dragon Cliff's sunken vat yellow wine and brought an inferior horse over. Su Fengnian personally held the reins and sent them off to the outside of the prince's mansion. He even stuffed a few banknotes of small denominations into Old Huang's hands. Old Huang did not refuse and said, "Young master, please go back. I know the way." Su Fengnian did not agree and said, "At least send it to the city gate, right?" The horse was an inferior horse. It was not that His Royal Highness was stingy, but whether it was the multicolored horse that had its mane cut into petals to look like celestial objects or the rarer and more precious Fergana horse, they did not conform to the principle of not being a fat sheep when going out. Moreover, Old Huang probably would not really ride a horse. Su Fengnian was just finding him a companion to talk to. The banknotes of 500 to 600 taels were for Old Huang to buy wine to drink. Old Huang loved yellow wine. It was not known whether it was because his surname was Huang that he liked to drink it, or because he loved yellow wine that his surname was Huang. Old Huang always had some sort of secret on him. However, in Su Fengnian's eyes, Old Huang was just the old coachman who carried him forward with difficulty. Huang Jianzhou was secondary. These were his thoughts, but he did not dare to say them out loud for fear of appearing pretentious. From Bailiang Palace to Lingzhou's main city gate, there was an end no matter how far it was. The captain of the city gate saw His Royal Highness's heavy expression and did not dare to go forward to flatter him. He only hurriedly chased everyone who was queuing up to leave the city to the side, making way for the empty city gate. Su Fengnian, who was leading the horse for old Huang, stood under the wall of the inner city gate. He passed the reins to the old coachman and said sentimentally, "We'll stop here, I won't send you off." "Old Huang, is it boring to interact with a wastrel like me, a frog at the bottom of a well?" Old Huang shook his head and stared at His Royal Highness's young and handsome face. He chuckled and said, "It's very interesting." Really, old Huang doesn't know how to flatter. Doesn't young master often say that I speak honestly? Su Fengnian smiled faintly. Old Huang took out a stack of silk and used charcoal to draw sword forms. There were not many words on each piece, only 2. From sword 1, sword 2, to sword 9. They were crooked like earthworms crawling on mud. He passed it to Su Fengnian and said, "Young master, keep it. In the future, if you see a child with spiritual energy, help me take him in as a disciple. It's more appropriate to snatch a virgin on the streets." Su Fengnian carefully kept it. Old Huang thought for a moment and said with a troubled expression, "Young master, old Huang is not cultured. I don't know how to name my sword. I only know 9 moves. From sword 1 to sword 9, the first 8 moves have been named by the people of the Jianghu on their own. I feel uncomfortable when I hear them. Young master, can you think of one for me?" Su Fengnian did not know whether to laugh or cry. He thought seriously for a moment and said, "The 2 of us walked 6,000 miles and you call it 6,000 miles. If you don't think it's vulgar and not imposing, you can use this." Old Huang gave him a thumbs up and praised, "It's imposing. When I reach Martial Emperor City, I'll tell you this amazing sword name. Maybe even Wang Xianji will be jealous." In the end, old Huang still led the horse and left with the pot hanging from his waist. Su Fengnian climbed up the wall and looked at old Huang's lonely figure. He shouted at the top of his voice, "Old Huang, if you want to drink rice wine on the way and you can't afford it after spending all your money, just come back. I'll save it for you." The old servant stopped and turned around. He took a deep look at Su Fengnian and shouted their common catchphrase, "Run when the wind blows." Then, he ran away in a funny, cute, and silly manner. Sword 9. 6,000 miles. Chapter 28. Su Fengnian led a group of valiant cavalry back to the mansion and arrived at the courtyard where the old man lived. As soon as he entered the room, he saw a table full of delicacies. It was obvious that he was a man who would not be happy without meat and wine. The old man's figure was like a small mountain. Even though he was sitting, his aura was astonishing. Moreover, he had 2 chains and 2 knives. The servants hid in the courtyard and did not dare to approach him. When the old man saw Su Fengnian, he immediately asked, "Kid, did 9th brother Huang go to the Martial Emperor City to fight old Immortal Wang?" Su Fengnian nodded with a lonely expression. He sat on the stool opposite old Kuei, whose hair was as white as snow, and said nothing. The old warrior laughed, "Kid, I didn't expect you to be a nostalgic master. In this aspect, you are much kinder than your father. Su Shao, that butcher, not only is full of tricks, he is also sanctimonious. We can share trials and tribulations together, but if you want to share riches and honor together, then you are pulling your mother's eggs. Hey, kid, are you angry? With your mediocre skills, you want to fight with me? Without 9th brother Huang, the Northern Liang Mansion will only be able to fight grandfather if they call out the remaining experts who are hiding in the shadows." Su Fengnian curled his lips and muttered, "Now that old Huang is gone, you dare to call yourself the king of the mountain when there are no tigers." The old man's ears were sharp, but he was not angry. He said calmly, "If you can't beat him, then you can't beat him. There is nothing to be ashamed of." Ninth brother Huang's swordsmanship is almost on par with Dong Tai, who likes to play tricks with a peach blossom branch. There are so many people who learn swordsmanship in the world. Even the Wu family's sword tomb has not produced a swordsman who can fight old Immortal Wang in the past 30 years. I accept my defeat wholeheartedly. Since I was born, other than Dong Tai who can fight old Immortal Wang to a draw, only ninth brother Huang is slightly inferior to him. In the whole world, the number of people who use swords can be counted with 2 hands. The old man's words made Su Fengnian have a good impression of him. He felt that the old man was indeed an expert. How could ordinary people have such breadth of mind? No wonder there were only a handful of experts in the world. It was excusable that he could not become an expert. But just as Su Fengnian started to admire him, old Kuei's words ruined the image of an expert that he had inadvertently built up. "Kid, where can you find a more spacious toilet? Grandpa can't get used to sitting in the lavatory inlaid with gold and jade. I've been stuck at the bottom of the lake for all these years, and I can't even relieve myself when I want to. You can probably smell it from miles away." Ha! Looking at the old man, whose mouth was still stuffed with barbecued meat, he wanted to go to the outhouse to smoke people. Su Fengnian's face was stiff and twitching. He got up and called for the servants to lead the old man, who was mopping the floor with chains and giant sabers, to the outhouse. His Royal Highness quickly ran away like the wind. Along the way, he kept cursing, "Expert your mother." Wudong Garden was the place where Su Fengnian grew up. Because of the ancient saying, "A phoenix does not rest unless it is a tree." The great pillar of the country, Su Shao, always liked to say earnestly, "Son, when your mother gave birth to you, she had a dream that a phoenix entered her stomach. You are a natural talent. If I don't love you, who should I love?" At first, Su Fengnian would refute, "Then why didn't any expert say that I was a martial arts prodigy?" Su Shao would explain, "True experts are those who are not willing to move once they take root in a place. Look at Wang Xianji and those old swordsmen of the Wu family's sword tomb. Which one of them would come out and claim to be an expert? Those who come out to make a living are all liars. How could they see through my son's natural talent?" After Su Fengnian's ears grew calluses, he simply ignored this. He felt that as the heir of the only prince with a different surname in the dynasty, he didn't need to roll up his sleeves and beat people up. However, in his heart, he was still a little envious of those heroes who jumped onto roofs and vaulted over walls and competed on the roofs of the city walls when they had nothing to do. As for now, after seeing the godly skills of horsekeeper old Huang and the white-haired old man, he couldn't help but feel a little regretful. He had heard that in the Jianghu, there were only a handful of immortal couples. The man's skill was unparalleled, and the woman's martial arts were unparalleled. When had he ever heard of the man being handsome and the woman having unparalleled martial arts? When Su Fengnian entered Wudong Garden, his gloomy mood lightened. A maidservant named Blue Bird came up to greet him. Her delicate arm was embroidered with precious shoe embroidery, and the 6-year phoenix, spear falcon, was perched on it. When she saw His Royal Highness, she smiled sweetly and said, "Young master, Sweet Potato has already warmed the bed. Green Ant is lying on the chessboard, waiting for young master to play with her." Su Fengnian stretched out a finger to tease the spear falcon. He smiled as he entered the room. Outside the room, 2 beautiful maidservants had already taken off his outer robe for him. There were a total of more than 20 maidservants in Wudong Garden. The maidservants originally had elegant names like Red Musk or Brother Parrot. However, after His Royal Highness returned from his travels, other than Blue Bird, who was a little luckier, most of the others had their names changed. Even the maidservant Red Musk, who had always been favored by His Royal Highness because of her delicate fragrance, was not spared. Her name was changed to the unbearably vulgar Sweet Potato. There were others who were even more unlucky. For example, Bygone, who had the same name as Liquor. The most unlucky one was a maidservant who had received the name Cucumber because she liked yellow clothes. After entering the inner room, Su Fengnian jumped onto the bed and burrowed into the blankets. He hugged a beautiful woman in her prime. The entire blanket was filled with fragrance. After a few more days, it would be even more magical. As long as the girl in his arms walked out of the door, she would attract bees and butterflies. She was the eldest maidservant Sweet Potato. As for the maidservant who was good at Go, she was called Lu Yi. She was known as the female national chess player of Bailiang Palace. Some of the officials who were good at chess would have a headache when they met her. Usually, there were 17 Go boards. Changing 17 to 19 was another great feat of Su Fengnian's second sister. It had caused a huge uproar in the dynasty. In the end, she was first accepted by Shangyin Academy and became the mainstream of famous scholars. Su Fengnian played a game with Lu Yi. He was absent-minded and naturally lost badly. Actually, he wasn't bad at chess. Even his master, Li Shan, had commented that his vision was excellent, but he was reluctant to lay out the details, and his strength was lacking. Although this didn't sound like a compliment, it was a great honor to hear it coming from Li Shan's mouth. Of course, Su Fengnian could not be considered a Go master. The true national chess player was Su Fengnian's second sister, Su Weisheng. She was a valiant figure who made the so-called famous scholar, Mu Yehu, feel ashamed of his inferiority. Su Fengnian pushed away the game that had already ended and lay on the bed. He let the head maidservant, Sweet Potato, rub his temples. The second maidservant, Lu Yi, saw that her master was not in a good mood and did not dare to disturb him. Su Fengnian stood up and said, "All of you leave first. Without my permission, no one is allowed to enter, not even Su Shao." Sweet Potato was born with a voluptuous body and fair skin. Coupled with her innate body fragrance and elegant mannerisms, she didn't deliberately compete for attention. Instead, she was the most favored one. When she got off the bed, Su Fengnian smiled and patted her buttocks. She blushed and looked back with a charming smile. After the maidservants left, Su Fengnian immediately sat up straight and took out what could probably be called a sword manual. This was old Huang's life's work. Even if Su Fengnian had no interest in martial arts, he had to treat it seriously. He hid it in a box made of unknown material under the bed. In order to open the box, one had to move 72 small compartments without missing a step. The box was extraordinarily hard. Even if one tried to hack it with a sword, one would not be able to get what was inside. Su Fengnian's movements were skillful. He could open the box even with his eyes closed. He put the sword manual inside and pushed the box back into the secret compartment under the bed. Only then did he lie down on the big bed. Chapter 29. Su Fengnian estimated the time. The white-haired old man should have finished squatting in the latrine, got up and left the inner room. He put on his beautiful clothes and shouted, "Cucumber." The servant girl who wished she could never wear yellow clothes in her life immediately went to the other courtyard and brought 3 cucumbers. Su Fengnian took one in his hand and 2 under his armpit, munching on them as he walked. At first, he was worried that the old man's courtyard would be smelly, but when he got closer, he realized that he was worrying too much. The latrine of the prince's mansion prepared countless spices. Even if the old man defecated like he was wielding a knife, the smell would not spread too far. Not only did the old man defecate, he also took a bath and changed into a clean set of clothes. He sat on the steps and lowered his head to stroke the blade. Without raising his head, he asked, "Doll, are you really not afraid?" Su Fengnian sat beside him and chuckled. "Old Huang said you are not only the best knife user in the world, you have never killed anyone in your life, so I am not afraid." The old man laughed and shook his head. "This is half true and half false. I don't kill people indiscriminately, but I am not the best knife user." "Doll, your mouth is too slippery, I don't like it." Su Fengnian smiled mischievously. "As long as Miss likes me, it's fine if old grandpa doesn't like me. Anyway, after beating up the turtle of Wudang Mountain, we will go our separate ways. But if old grandpa still misses the food in the prince's mansion, you are welcome to stay and eat." The old man chuckled and asked, "What is the rank of that Wudang Mountain Grandmaster?" Su Fingnian thought for a while and said, "Shouldn't be high, but his seniority is outrageous. A Wudang Mountain Taoist priest who is less than 30 years old, how high can his rank be? Besides, there is no name of him in Jianghu." Old Kuei nodded in realization and said, "Oh, that should be the youngest junior brother of the Wudang Mountain chief Wang Zhonglo who cultivates the Great Yellow Court Pass. Grandpa has heard about him when I entered the Cold Land back then. His martial arts aptitude is average, but he specializes in Dao techniques and great techniques, which is somewhat mysterious." Su Fingnian asked the question he was most concerned about, "Old Grandpa, can you beat him?" The old man said, "Doll, Grandpa will give you a word. Whether you can beat him or not, you will only know after you fight, right?" Su Fingnian couldn't help but grumble, "You sound so heroic, but what happened in the end? Didn't you stay at the bottom of the lake for more than 10 years? Old Kuei knocked Su Fingnian's head with a knife. "Don't think I don't know what you're thinking." Su Fingnian piled a smile on his face and said with a mischievous grin, "Then let's go to that bullshit Wudang Mountain and make a ruckus." The old man suddenly stood up, his figure enveloping Su Fingnian's whole body, the two chains clanging. Yes. Wudang Mountain had 2 ponds, 4 pools, 9 wells, 24 deep streams, 36 cliffs, 81 peaks, a nunnery, and a 10-mile palace. With the Taishan Palace on the Jade Pillar Peak as the center, the 81 peaks surrounded the peak, and the palace was tilted, forming the famous 81 peaks. For thousands of years, countless people who pursued the path of immortality retreated to Wudang, or sat on the cliff, or hid in the immortal's coffin, listening to the heavenly music, watching the mist and clouds, and the green mountains and rivers, leaving behind countless legends. Wudang was the Taoist holy land of the previous dynasty, firmly suppressing Mount Longhu. After the establishment of the Liang dynasty, Mount Longhu became the ancestral court of Taoism. Wudang had been silent for hundreds of years, but no one dared to underestimate this mountain's 1,000 years of heritage. Although the current leader, Wang Zhonglo, occupied one of the top 10 positions, legend has it that the Immortal guides the way broke through the turbulent surging waves river. Regardless of whether it was a rumor or an exaggeration, in the end, he was still a virtuous and respected Taoist old immortal. Especially when he cultivated the most difficult and time-consuming Great Yellow Court Pass, it gave the whole Wudang Mountain a kind of unspoken air that spoke louder than words. 200 Bailiang cavalry mighty and mighty. A tall and sturdy old warrior wearing a black robe, dragging a long saber on the ground as he ran, dust flying. Mountains crumbled and the earth cracked. A group of people rushed straight to the Wudang Mountain gates, Black Tortoise in Prosperity, Memorial Arch. The leading rider actually directly stepped on his horse, passing through the Memorial Arch before pulling the reins. In the 100 years of Jianghu, the only one who dared to look down on the martial arts world sect was Su Rintu, whose name made the older generation of Jianghu people pale. Tiger Father Dog Son. His Royal Highness Su Fingnian, riding on a vigorous Bailiang military horse, laughed self-deprecatingly. Looking at the group of Taoist priests who were attracted by this grand formation, he gloomily shouted, "I'll give you half an hour, make that green ox rider roll out." This group of Wudang Mountain Taoist priests was in a difficult position. It wasn't that they didn't know that there was a martial granduncle on the mountain with the same seniority as Jade Pillar Peak who liked to ride the green ox, but they were only ordinary Taoist priests of the Jade Pure Palace at the foot of the mountain. Not to mention that they couldn't move that martial granduncle. Even if the martial granduncle was easy to talk to, it would take at least half an hour to run to Taishan Palace, and 2 hours to go back and forth. The incoming people were aggressive. Could they wait? Jade Pillar Peak was divided into 2, big and small lotus peaks. The big Lotus Peak had more than 10 heavenly paradises for secluded cultivation, while the small Lotus Peak on one side of the cliff belonged to one person by default. This person was brought up the mountain by the previous generation's Wudang sect leader at the age of 5 and was accepted as a secluded disciple. At a young age, he became martial brothers with the current generation's sect leader, Wang Zhongluo. Wudang Mountain's 9 palaces and 13 temples, the majority of the several thousand yellow-crowned Taoist priests who saw this young man had to respectfully address him as martial granduncle. The younger ones even had to call him Taishang martial granduncle. Fortunately, this young ancestor had never left the mountain. He had only seen the memorial arch of the black tortoise Dang Xing when he entered the mountain. Afterwards, he had never approached it, nor did he even look at it from afar. For the past 20 years or so, if he wasn't at Jade Pillar Peak's Tai Chin Palace, then he was at Big and Small Lotus Peaks riding the green ox. Those who were lucky enough to see his true appearance would all return and tell others that his martial granduncle had an extremely good temper, was extremely knowledgeable, and was extremely elegant. The mountain gate was noisy, but on the edge of Small Lotus Peak's precipitous cliff, the Turtle Camel Tablet, it was very quiet. A young Taoist priest with an elegant appearance was lying on the back of a stone turtle, basking in the sun. He waved his hand, and a green ox grazing in the distance came forward. Several volumes of Taoist scriptures were hanging from the ox's horns. He took one down and was just about to flip through it when he suddenly pinched his fingers and jumped off the turtle's back. He found a withered branch and drew a dense array of heavenly stems and earthly branches on the ground. His expression slightly changed, and he continuously muttered to himself before finally sighing heavily. He carefully tidied his Taoist robe's sleeves and collar, flipped over the ox, and rode down Small Lotus Peak with a book hanging from its horns. He was half chanting and half singing, straight as a string, dead on the edge of the road. Curved like a hook, conferred the title of Marquis. Who drags the tail along the way, who leaves the bones in the hole. After leaving Small Lotus Peak, he released the green ox and carefully took down a volume of Taoist scriptures with the cover of the Spiritual Source Song. He read it as he walked, and with great interest, he went straight to the foot of Wudang Mountain. On the way, there would occasionally be Taoist priests who would stop and call him martial uncle or martial granduncle. He would smile and greet them, and was very amiable and approachable. Everyone only felt that this young senior was really diligent. He was indeed worthy of being the martial granduncle who had annotated countless ancient books in the Jade Pure Palace. It was no wonder that the headmaster praised him as the martial arts and orthodoxy of the world will be shouldered by him. But they didn't know that this martial granduncle who had an extremely good reputation was currently reading an erotic novel that was most despised by Taoists. It was just that it was pasted on the cover of the Spiritual Source Song. The Taoist priest flipped through the book over and over again, and because he couldn't bear to part with it, he borrowed it from His Royal Highness in the past. As he neared the foot of the mountain, he flipped the page over and over again dozens of times. Only then did he reluctantly put it away, and with a face full of righteousness, he said, "Even if you beat me black and blue, I will definitely not return this book." Chapter 30. When Su Fingnian, who was sitting high on his horse, saw that familiar figure, he hid in a corner of the pure jade palace and poked his head out. When this person saw His Royal Highness, he shrank back. Su Fingnian raised his horsewhip and angrily shouted, "Bull rider! If you hide again, I'll bring people to flatten the pure jade palace and throw you and the tortoise camel tablet off the Small Lotus Peak." The young Taoist with the highest hopes of Wudang Mountain in the past 100 years appeared in front of everyone. He stopped far away from the Bailiang cavalry and bowed. With a face full of happiness, he said, "This little Taoist greets His Royal Highness." This martial granduncle politely saluted Su Fingnian, but his eyes were always fixed on the white-haired, black-robed old man. Wudang Mountain was known for half of the world's internal strength coming from the Jade Pillar. In addition to Wudang Mountain's famous swordsmanship, it also focused on internal strength cultivation. It was a model for both internal and external strength cultivation. The Daoist had seen many senior brothers of the same generation on the Big Lotus Peak. He had experienced the phenomenon of internal strength reaching the realm of perfection. The old man in front of him who used a strange blade technique was clearly like this. His chi was endless, and he looked like a difficult person to deal with. The martial granduncle of Wudong Mountain, who had not yet reached the age of 30, subconsciously took 2 steps back. He threw a look at His Royal Highness, who had the momentum to flatten Wudong Mountain. Su Fengnian threw back a look, and the martial granduncle returned a look. This repeated over and over again, causing the onlookers to be at a loss. They did not know what the two of them were up to. In the end, in the eyes of the pure Jade Palace's Daoist, the martial granduncle had undoubtedly won. He definitely had the bearing of a grandmaster who won without a fight. Everyone saw the martial granduncle turn around and walk away confidently. His body exuded an inexhaustible aura, while the repulsive His Royal Highness only followed him up the steps of Wudong Mountain with the white-haired old man. The Daoist priests were relieved. The martial granduncle was indeed the martial granduncle. Without saying a word, he made the debauchees surnamed Su compromise. However, the Daoist priests did not know that the 3 of them had arrived at a secluded place. In their hearts, the martial granduncle who was second only to the Immortal's finger-breaking Zhanglan, was kicked and punched by Su Fengnian for an entire incense sticks. Martial granduncle's pleading, when you hit people, don't hit's face, when you kick people, kicks his, martial granduncle's bird's bird. After finishing the work, Su Fengnian performed the technique of circulating his qi in his dantian. Finally, he felt refreshed. Leaving behind a forbidden erotic book, Su Fengnian swaggered off. However, he did not descend the mountain. Instead, he took old Kuei along a narrow, winding path carved into the bluestone floor of the cliff, and ascended to the Jingle Palace hanging on the precipice. The most remarkable thing about this palace was that there was an altar for praying for rain built out of the cliff, resembling the Big Dipper. According to the Daoist classics, it was said that the purple cloud immortal of Wudong Mountain had once ascended on this altar. The Jingle Palace was usually not open to the public. Some scholars who were looking for secluded places could only return without finding anything outside the palace. However, Su Fengnian was able to take the old man to the Big Dipper altar because of his father. The wind on the mountain was chilly. The old man sat cross-legged, his clothes fluttering in the wind. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the distant peak and the sea of clouds. With light steps, Su Fengnian stood behind the old man with the saber. Only then did he stabilize his body. He could barely open his eyes and could only sit down, coincidentally hiding in the old man's shadow. Su Fengnian strenuously shouted, "Old grandpa, how's that little Daoist skill?" The old man seemed to be puzzled and said, "His martial arts are mediocre. He seems to be the same as you. It's a pity that father and mother gave him such a good physique. As for the Dao technique, I don't know how to test it. I don't know, but it shouldn't be too bad or too good. Most of the difficult things in the world can't escape the path of sailing against the current. If one is not willing to endure hardships, how can one become a talent? It's strange. Why did Wudong Mountain choose this material? Could it be that it's the same as the descendants of the Zen sect? I can't figure it out, I can't figure it out." Su Fengnian was even more puzzled. He asked, "Can this Dao technique be eaten? Or can it be used to kill people?" The old man thought for a while and laughed. "Kid, you asked the wrong person. It can't be used to kill people." The young Daoist from Wudong Mountain who was of the same generation as the supreme leader put his hands into the sleeves of his Daoist robe and stood at the edge of the altar. However, he refused to step on the 7 stars and smiled as he gave the answer. Looking at his figure, he wasn't like the old man who was as immovable as a mountain, nor was he like Su Fengnian who was stumbling. He only swayed with the wind, swaying and swaying. The amplitude was not too big nor too small. Su Fengnian's eyes were poor, he didn't see the knack. He just turned around and stared at the bull-riding Daoist who made his sister leave Beiliang with regret. He asked gloomily, Hong Shixiang, why don't you want to go down the mountain and walk through the Black Tortoise Will Prosper Memorial Arch? The youngest ancestor in Wudang Daoist's thousand-year history grinned, his face blushing with embarrassment. He said, I came up the mountain when I was 5 and learned a little bit of divination when I was 8. Master told me to calculate a little every day, a little every month, and a big one every year to calculate when I can go down the mountain and when I need to go into seclusion on the mountain. But ever since I learned this knowledge, there hasn't been a day that I don't need to go into seclusion. Su Fengnian didn't take it seriously. He sneered, I heard that your master set a rule for you before he died. If you don't become the best in the world, you can't go down the mountain. Then it seems like you won't be able to go down the mountain for the rest of your life. The Daoist with an extraordinary name still kept his hands in his sleeves and laughed. It's true that I'm the best in the world, but I eat the most and read the most. Master didn't say that I'm the best in martial arts. There will be a day when I go down the mountain. Su Fengnian got up with difficulty and looked in the direction of Jiangnan. He said softly, but at that time, I'll be old. When we meet again, white hair will meet white hair. Is it useful? Hong Shixiang closed his eyes and didn't say anything. Su Fengnian let out a long breath and snorted coldly. He walked out of the altar and passed by the Daoist priest. He stopped and asked, What do you think of my sister? The Daoist priest, who had been in the lapis lazuli world for as long as he could remember, said softly, She's the best. Su Fengnian walked out of the Jingle Palace with an expressionless face. Behind him, the old man with the fierce blade seemed to be deep in thought. Zhao Shixiang waited for His Royal Highness to walk away. Then, he squatted down in an inelegant posture and rested his cheeks on his hands. He was lost in thought and muttered to himself, Red beans grow in the southern kingdom. Spring comes and the branches grow and wither in winter. It's better not to miss than not to miss. Above the Daoist priest's head, dozens of red-crowned cranes full of spiritual energy circled and cried, making him look like a celestial immortal. He suddenly clutched his stomach and said with a frown, I'm hungry again. When they were going down the mountain, the old man suddenly clicked his tongue and said, Interesting. That little cow-nosed Daoist priest has some skills. Su Fengnian wasn't very interested and asked perfunctorily, What do you mean? The old man said uncertainly, That kid cultivates the supreme way of heaven. Su Fengnian felt a headache when he heard this nonsense. He frowned and said, There are people who go to a dead end for something so mysterious and empty. Aren't they afraid that they'll find out in the end? The old man laughed and said, I don't like these confusing things either. Su Fengnian arrived at the archway at the foot of the mountain. He ignored the bowing and scraping of the Daoist priests and looked up at the mountain. He scolded, That turtle hiding in its shell. 200 cavalrymen standing respectfully at the foot of the steps saw His Royal Highness and mounted their horses again. Their movements were neat and clean without any superfluity. The Beiliang cavalry were all equipped with angry horses and fresh armor. Every year, they would be dragged to the border by the Great Pillar State for actual combat training. In addition, the Liangdi people were valiant and many of the women were good at archery and horse riding. This was their most unique advantage. For example, Su Fengnian's elder sister Su Jihu was adept at riding and archery since she was young, not to mention his second sister Su Weisheng. Not only was her horsemanship excellent, her swordsmanship was even better. She was better than apes and monkeys and had the reputation of being an antelope. She started killing people at the age of 13 and had cut off nearly 100 heads. The Liangdi people were warlike since ancient times. Therefore, in the eyes of experts, the Beiliang cavalry was far more powerful than the troops and horses under the king of Yanlu and king of Jiaodong. They deserved to be called the lions of 100 battles. The old man waited for Su Fengnian to mount his horse. He laughed and said, Kid, I won't go back to the palace. Without Huang Laojiu, it's really boring. Su Fengnian blinked his eyes and persuaded, "Why don't you wait for me to reach adulthood first?" Without old grandpa, Fengnian would have died at the bottom of the lake. There's still about half a year left. I'll prepare some good food and drink for old grandpa. I'll repay your life-saving grace as much as I can, okay? The old man thought for a moment and then nodded his head in agreement. It could be seen that this saber hero actually did not dislike the Bailiang's most important disciple in front of him. They galloped all the way back to the palace. When they just entered the city, it started snowing heavily for no reason. It was crazy. Su Fengnian was shivering from the cold. When they reached the door, the eager gatekeeper tactfully handed over a top-grade fox fur coat with both hands and carefully put it on His Royal Highness. He was more attentive than serving his own parents. Su Fengnian mumbled. He didn't know if old Huang had brought enough clothes. After saying goodbye to the old man, he went straight to Yu Youwei's courtyard alone. A beautiful woman was left out in the cold. It was too wasteful for her to admire herself all day long. It was not good. It was not in line with Su Fengnian's temperament of watering flowers. On the way, he passed by Jiangni's poor residence that could not be considered a courtyard. He saw the fallen princess in thin clothes half squatting to build a snowman. The snowman was half the height of a person. After she finished, she did not look happy when she saw the snowman. Instead, she looked at the snowman with resentment. Then, she took out the divine talisman that she was relying on. With a swing of her dagger, she chopped off the snowman's head. Su Fengnian felt a chill down his spine. Did this crazy girl think that the snowman was him? Su Fengnian coughed a few times and then walked over. Jiang Ni was originally flustered, but when she saw that it was His Royal Highness, she was relieved and slowly put away her weapon. When Su Fengnian came closer, he saw that her hands were red and covered with eyesore frostbite. She looked like a pitiful servant girl who was bullied in the laundry department. Su Fengnian sighed and squatted down to rebuild the snowman's head. In Jiang Ni's eyes, it was naturally pretentious and disgusting. Su Fengnian clapped his hands and stood up. He gently asked, "Do you want me to buy you some warm clothes?" Jiang Ni coldly said, "I think it's dirty." Chapter 31. Su Fengnian laughed aloud and said, "I was just saying it casually. In any case, I will be a good person. Whether you appreciate it or not, it has nothing to do with me. I like the way you are, always letting me take advantage of you. Doing business with you is the most profitable." Before leaving, Su Fengnian stabbed this little maidservant with a sentence, "No matter how shabby your clothes are, aren't they still my things? If you have the ability to take them off, then you will be a heroine." Jiang Ni pretended not to hear. When she bickered with the shameless and thick-skinned Su Fengnian, she always lost more than she won. Thinking about it carefully, she might not even be able to gain the upper hand even once. After Su Fengnian, who was in a good mood, saw Yu Youwei, his mood became even better. Nyangqin once said that for a beautiful girl, no matter if he had the temperament of a bodhisattva or the heart of a snake or scorpion, he would still feel sorry for her. In his nearly 20 years of life, Su Fengnian had never done anything ruthless. On the contrary, he had directly or indirectly saved the lives of more than 20 maidservants who were as lowly as dust. Yu Youwei was lazily lying in the warm bedroom, teasing the chubby Wu Meinyang whose fur was as white as snow. Every time it snowed, Su Fengnian would want to throw Wu Meinyang into the snow to see if she could distinguish the innocent cat from the white snow. He had been holding back this kind of evil interest, thinking that when Yu Youwei and Wu Meinyang separated, he would definitely give it a try. Su Fengnian took off his boots and lay down beside Yu Youwei. Leaning on her warm and graceful body, he closed his eyes to rest and said softly, "I went to Mount Wudong and gave a good beating to a Taoist priest of the same generation as the sect leader. Wasn't that amazing?" Yu Youwei smiled faintly and said, "It was the great pillar of the country that was amazing." Su Fengnian opened his eyes and turned her around. He gave her a hard smack on her round, peach-shaped buttocks and lectured, "This prince will personally teach you how to flatter." Yu Wei blushed slightly. Su Fingnian was just about to take advantage of the situation when the light voice of Wudong Garden's second-rank maid, Lu Yi, came from the courtyard. She said that a letter from Mount Longhu had arrived. Su Fingnian didn't have time to take advantage of Yu Wei. He hastily put on his boots and ran out of the room to take the letter. Seeing that Lu Yi's slender shoulders were covered in snow, he smiled and gently brushed it off for her. When he arrived at his own Wudong Garden, he found that the floor tiles here were the best. It was fine to go barefoot as it wasn't hot or cold. It couldn't even compare to Su Zhao's room. Su Fingnian enjoyed being meted by his first-rank maid and took out the letter. Oh, that old Daoist from Mount Longhu with the surname Zhao had good handwriting. Taking a closer look, his younger brother's cultivation at Mount Longhu was described as vigorous and courageous, advancing 1,000 miles in a day. To Su Fingnian, who had heard too much bureaucratic jargon, this kind of overflowing praise was already very impressive even if half of the exaggeration was taken out. It seemed that Huang Man didn't go in vain. At the end of the letter, he carefully mentioned that Su Longxiang was homesick, so the old Daoist implored His Royal Highness to write a letter home so that his disciple could cultivate in peace. After Su Fingnian put down the letter, he waved his hand and said, "Grind." Immediately, the room began to grind with bare hands. After Su Fingnian picked up the brush, he began to hesitate. For a moment, he didn't know where to start. He almost scratched his ears and cheeks. There was a saying that when it came to using books, one would regret not having enough of them. Su Fingnian simply put down the brush and rubbed his head against his first-rank maid's full breasts. He asked, "Did that rouge-eater from the Lin family see Su Xiao?" Sweet Potato said coquettishly, "He saw him, but he didn't want to leave." Su Fingnian smirked and said, "Could it be that this debauchee wants to eat your rouge?" Green Ant said with disdain, "That tattered embroidered pillow is not worthy of our sister's attention." Su Fingnian rolled his eyes and said, "Am I not an embroidered pillow?" Sweet Potato's hands gently wrapped around His Royal Highness, squeezing her firm breasts into an astonishing curve. She said with natural charm, "His Royal Highness is not a pillow, your servant is." Su Fingnian smiled and said, "This little mouth of yours is quite impressive." Green Ant sat a little further away, picking up and putting down the chess pieces again and again, bored to death. Su Fingnian sat up straight and looked outside the room. Unsurprisingly, Blue Bird, the eccentric maid, was in a daze again. Wudong Garden was a small sparrow, but it had all the essentials. In addition to the fourth-rank maids and female servants, there were all kinds of odd-job workers. Because of His Royal Highness, they had a very high status in Beiliang Palace. Not to mention the first-rank maids that Su Fingnian especially favored, even the second-rank maids were welcomed with smiles by the housekeepers and gatekeepers. Of these maids, Sweet Potato, who was nicknamed Red Deer, had a weak personality and was easy to talk to. Blue Bird was the complete opposite. She was respectful and close to Su Fingnian, but she did not follow blindly. Su Fingnian had been mischievous since he was young and had caused trouble many times. It was always the Blue Bird, whose temper was like a red-maned horse, who cleaned up his messes. Speaking of Blue Bird, ever since Su Fingnian was sensible, he had felt that she was always by his side. It was Wang Fei who had personally led her to him. She was not like a maid, but more like an older sister. She was not very close to the other maids in Wudong Garden. She was born with a cold face and a cold heart. Every year, she would not be in the Wang Fu for a few periods of time, but every time she came back, she would give His Royal Highness a small object that she cared about. After a small incident in his youth, Su Fingnian had kept it. Generally speaking, the people in Wudong Garden were all people with no big stories. They were pleasant people, but after chewing and chewing, they were bland and thin. It seemed that this was all because the great pillar state could not tolerate sand in his eyes. Su Fengnian did his best to empty out the ink in his pocket before he could barely write a letter to the Feng family. It was long-winded and long-winded. It was all trivial matters, the complete opposite of his original intention. In the end, he had to comfort himself that if he wrote too profound, Wang Manor would not understand. It was best to be straightforward. After he finished writing the letter, Su Fengnian stretched and went out of the room. As expected, he saw Blue Bird standing in the corridor of the courtyard, lost in thought. He looked at the sky. The heavy snow had stopped for a while, and it was the best time to travel at night. He pulled Blue Bird out of Wudong Garden and planned to go to Fengyi Hall to tease the sickly and pitiful Fan Mimi. As for Lin Tanhua, Su Fengnian felt that she was very much to Li Hanlin's liking. On the way, Su Fengnian remembered that today seemed to be his dog's day. He smiled and asked, "Has there been any movement in the Fu?" Blue Bird's reply was as concise and clear as ever, "There has been." Su Fengnian's spirits were roused. He smiled and asked, "Is it going to the Tide Listening Pavilion, or is it looking for Su Shao?" Blue Bird shook her head and said, "I don't know." Su Fengnian sighed with regret, "There are fewer and fewer people taking the bait these days." His Royal Highness had nothing to do these past few years, so he deliberately let the usually heavily guarded Bailiang Palace relax for a period of time, but keep it tight inside. He called it fishing, and it was specifically used to lure in those Jianghu heroes who coveted the secret manuals of the martial arts library, or those hot-blooded assassins who were full of enemies. There had been a card day 4 or 5 years ago, and at most, it had lured in 4 groups of uninvited guests. After a round of beating, it was said that 26 corpses were dragged out the next day to be chopped up and fed to the dogs. After returning from his travels, he had played cards twice, but there had been no harvest. Presumably, those uncivilized heroes had come to their senses, and there were very few fish and shrimps that had fallen for the bait. He just didn't know what the results would be today. Su Fengnian's extreme boredom could be seen. Blue Bird suddenly stopped and looked back at Wudong Garden. Su Fengnian asked in a low voice, "What's the matter?" She said softly, "Nothing." Su Fengnian suppressed the doubts in his heart and went to the Phoenix Rites Pavilion. When he entered the room, he saw Sister Fan talking with the one surnamed Lin. Seeing Su Fengnian, Miss Fan seemed to be stunned for a moment, while Tanhua Lin looked as if he had lost his parents. From what he had seen and heard in the residence recently, he finally knew that the person in front of him, who claimed to be His Highness's study companion, was the real heir apparent of Prince Liang. He stood up nervously and bowed to the ground, saying in a trembling voice, "Greetings to His Royal Highness." Before Su Fengnian could speak, the noise of the prince's mansion's soldiers came from outside the door. Master Lin was confused, but Sister Fan smiled sadly and looked at Su Fengnian with a complicated expression. Yuan Zuozong, who was second only to Qin Jibao among the Pillar State's adopted sons, walked into the room in armor and held a portrait in his hand. The Bailiang's first general narrowed his beautiful eyes and greeted His Royal Highness. Then he turned to look at the young guests. His eyes instantly turned cold, and he sneered, "Fan Shaochai, Lin Yu, come with me." Tanhua Lin was stunned. He didn't know what was going on, but he had suffered an unexpected disaster. His legs immediately went soft, and he sat down on the chair. The weak Miss Fan was taken away. She spat at Su Fengnian in front of her. She was very tough. As a result, she was slapped out of the room by Yuan Zuozong. She lay in the snow like a pile of mud. Su Fengnian didn't bat an eyelid. He took the portrait from Yuan Zuozong's hand. It was a portrait of himself. It was only 60 or 70% similar, but it was 12% similar. It could be seen that in the eyes of Sister Fan, he was quite insignificant. She didn't even want to look at him. In her mind, he was even more despicable. Su Fengnian sat down with the portrait and smiled. The 2 special assassins were taken away by Yuan Zuozong. Su Fengnian looked up and asked, Blue Bird, what about Wudong Garden? She calmly said, it's all right. Su Fengnian said self-deprecatingly, once I drank with Lu Qiuer and got drunk. The fatty said that I had 2 groups of death guards. One group had 4 people and only had 4 code names, A, B, C, and D. He didn't even know about the other group. Tell me, how many people are there in Wudong Garden? Are they maids or other servants? She closed her mouth and didn't speak. Su Fengnian looked straight at Blue Bird. Are you one? Blue Bird still didn't speak. Su Fengnian sighed and looked down at the portrait. If it's safe here, you can leave first. She left quietly without a sound. She came to Wudong Garden. The beautiful maid Sweet Potato was sitting on the railing of the corridor. She was holding a small bronze mirror. Her hands were stained with blood that looked like rouge. It was smeared on her lips. Blue Bird's eyes were full of disgust. This head maidservant, who was recognized by everyone in the mansion as weak and soft as a koi fish and needed to be fed by her master to survive, also did not look at the green bird. She only tilted her head and smiled at the mirror. Is it beautiful? Blue Bird sneered slightly. It was unusually ear-piercing in the silence. Sweet Potato pursed her lips. Under the moonlight and snow, her face was very enchanting. She coquettishly said, it's good that I'm more beautiful than you. Blue Bird turned and left, leaving behind a faint sentence. You grow old quickly. Sweet Potato didn't refute. Her eyes were hazy as she said to herself, it's good that I can't live until I'm old. Chapter 32. The next day, the truth came to light. The woman, whose real name was Fan Shaochai, was the daughter of a ruined aristocratic family whose family had fallen into ruin because of the pillar of the state. She was a dead chess piece. Regardless of whether she succeeded or not, she was a dead chess piece. However, she had many uses. She could be used to do work, occupy land, and search for roots. The second son of the Lin family was just an idiot who had been used. He was half dead and half alive. This Tanhua master had been kept in the dark about everything. He had only coveted Fan Shaochai's lips and had become an idiot from studying. How could he have known that the more attractive a woman was, the more trouble she would cause? After a shoddy chance encounter, he had become infatuated and recklessly brought into Bailiang Palace. Only heaven knew how the Lin family of Hedong's Chao country felt when they found out about this calamity. Last night's assassination attempt had not been meticulous and had been very crude. It had been done out of desperation. Miss Fan, who had entered the palace, had used the opportunity of sightseeing to draw a map of the palace and a portrait of heir Su Fengnian. Then, she had found an opportunity to assassinate him. However, their calculations were far inferior to those of the Liang Palace, and they had all suffered. As for the fate of the mastermind behind the woman surnamed Fan and the Chao country's Lin family, Su Fengnian, who was currently sitting in the Tide listening pavilion warming wine, could not be bothered to pay attention to them. He only wanted to know if Fan Shaochai regretted dying for a man she had never met. Su Fengnian did not have any pity for these people who were like moths to a flame. Beautiful women in the world were always like bamboo shoots after the rain and grass at night on the grassland. When one batch was gone, a new batch would pop up the next year. It would be impossible to get rid of all of them. If one were to go after them with pity, wouldn't that be tiring? Su Fengnian really did not have the leisure to do so. Moreover, after 3 years of hardship and traveling, Su Fengnian had also learned a lot about the shallow ways of the world. He remembered that he met a young swordsman who shared the same bad habits as him. That guy always liked to talk about how being merciful to the enemy was the same as risking one's life. It was said that he had learned it from some senior swordsman who had failed to achieve success. Every time he talked about it, his saliva would splatter everywhere, and it would always spray all over Su Fengnian's face. Su Fengnian still remembered that fellow who could not afford an iron sword and could only carry a wooden sword. Every time he saw a ranger with a sword on the street, he would look at him like a flower thief who had bumped into a beautiful woman. If that fellow knew that old Huang, who had been forced to listen to him bragging about the greatness of Mahayana swordsmanship, was actually Jianzhou Huang, who could even fight against the old monster Huang of Wulin city of Wulin, and that the old guy had hidden 5 famous swords in his sword box, what would he think? That fellow who had always wanted to find a famous teacher to learn from, was doing well now. Had he reached a higher level in swordsmanship? When they parted at the border of southern Yan, that fellow had said to Su Fengnian heroically, "When I become rich one day, I'll treat you to the best spiced beef. If 1 caddy is not enough, I'll treat you to 3 caddies." 3 caddies of beef seemed to be the limit of his imagination. After all, in the real Jianghu, there were few top masters who could break the river with 1 sword and move the mountains and rivers. Most of them were nameless pawns like that fellow, who had unreachable and ridiculous Jianghu dreams. Su Fengnian fiercely rubbed his cheeks. Seeing Yuan Zuozong standing aside and quietly waiting for him, Su Fengnian hurriedly got up and moved the stool for General Longwu of the 3rd grade. Yuan Zuozong's eyes flashed with surprise. He sat like a big bell and said seriously, "Your Highness, His Highness sent me to ask how to deal with the woman surnamed Fan." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Whatever should be done." Yuan Zuozong nodded slightly. After getting an unexpected answer, he immediately got up and was ready to leave. Su Fengnian did not stop him. Not long after he sat down, he stood up again and said, "Brother Yuan, let's drink together when you have time. We won't go home until we're drunk." Yuan Zuozong showed a rare smile and said, "Okay." Su Fengnian took a pot of wine that had been prepared in advance from the tea table and carried it to the tide listening pavilion. He went straight up to the 8th floor and saw his master, Li Yishan, who was engrossed in copying books. This haggard man with disheveled hair was not well known in Jianghu or in the imperial court. However, in Beiliang Palace, no one dared to disrespect the first tenant of the mansion. Su Fengnian sat aside and picked up the green gourd on the red sandalwood table with familiarity. He poured the wine into it. For a moment, the fragrance of the wine filled the air. The man stopped writing and smiled softly. "Now the smell of cosmetics on your body has faded a little. 3 years of parade is still beneficial." Su Fengnian smiled and then said worriedly, "Master, can old Huang go to Martial Emperor City to take back the yellow room sword on the city wall?" Li Yishan drank a mouthful of wine and shook his head gently. Su Fengnian said in shock, "Old Kuei at the bottom of the lake is already unparalleled, and old Huang is obviously a notch stronger. Then wouldn't Wang Xianji, who proclaimed herself as the city lord of the Eastern Sea, be truly invincible?" Li Yishan held the green gourd and stopped drinking. He just sniffed and said slowly, "Invincible in the world. There is a group of people above the 1st grade. Wang Xianji has been immersed in martial arts all his life and is close to the mysterious realm. However, he is not invincible. Now the martial arts world is divided by heroes. Each has his own merits. The scene of one person standing at the top will not appear now, nor will it happen in the future. Moreover, the extreme of martial arts is just touching the threshold of the way of heaven. Moreover, martial artists outside the imperial court have little influence on the general trend of the world. Otherwise, the Beiliang cavalry would not have trampled the entire Jianghu. If you don't want to learn martial arts, the Great Pillar State will not force you. I don't care either. That's it. If millions of soldiers bow their heads, it's better to be a fearful national thief. A civil official may be able to interfere with the government, but an ordinary man will not cause chaos in the country." Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily. For more than 10 years, the Liang dynasty has been tirelessly spreading this sentence that kills without spilling blood. Millions of soldiers can be subdued, but a national thief is fearful. The first half of the sentence was praising the Great Pillar State's martial arts, which was suspected of flattery. The second half of the sentence was a blatant attack. This sentence was very knowledgeable. Even Su Xiao clapped and laughed after hearing it. However, after laughing, he scolded, "Shangyin Academy is full of empty talk. They should be killed." Li Shan lifted the wine pot and made room for Su Fengnian to copy the book for him. Su Fengnian had long been accustomed to this. His calligraphy was not bad, but he still could not cultivate any awe-inspiring righteousness. Whenever he saw Su Fengnian's drawing was not right, he would hit him with the green gourd. Li Shan let His Royal Highness copy a lamp and sat down again. Su Fengnian lay on the side and looked at his master. His face was white, his hair was white, and he was in the declining state. The yellow scroll and the green lamp were hollow. It was said that the most bitter thing in the world was the declining state, and the hardest thing to cultivate was hollow. What kind of experience could make his master so calm? Li Shan did not raise his head and said softly, "Go and see the guests you invited to the Tide Listening Pavilion. They are about to reach the 3rd floor." Su Fengnian nodded and quietly went downstairs. On the 2nd floor, Su Fengnian saw that under a quaint bookshelf that was piled up like a mountain, stood the white fox face with a dark identity. She held a yellowed martial arts secret manual in her left hand, while her right index finger tapped her smooth forehead rhythmically. The sheathed winter-embroidered saber was inserted into the bookshelf as a mark. The white fox face just glanced at Su Fengnian and then lowered his head again. Su Fengnian, who was asking for a snub, had to retreat. It was as if the crown prince was the only person in the vast northern Liang mansion who had nothing to do. It was as if the crown prince was the only person who had nothing to do. Chapter 33. In the middle of the year, de Zhuguo chose an auspicious day to hold his son's coronation at the ancestral temple. What was unusual was that the coronation of the eldest son of the king of Beiliang was not as grand as that of a wealthy family. Not only were there few guests invited, even His Royal Highness's 2 sisters and 1 brother did not attend. After the refreshed Su Fengnian was led into the imperial ancestral temple by Su Xiao, he was crowned 3 times, a black hemp cloth crown, a white deerskin crown, and a red and black plain crown. The 3 small crowns on Su Fengnian's head attracted too much attention. The first crown was what all of the court officials of the Liang dynasty cared about, because it represented that His Royal Highness could enter the court. The second crown was more practical and lasting, because the 300,000 cavalry of Beiliang were waiting. As for the third crown, it only had some symbolic meaning and was not taken seriously. His Royal Highness had been busy all day, his face stiff. After bowing to the officials of Beiliang border who came to the Fu, he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. He enjoyed the tea and water served by the personal maids of Wudong Garden and massaged his shoulders, back, and legs. After a good rest, Su Fengnian finally took care of his hair and clothes. Finally, he went to the Wangfei's tomb with Su Xiao. A pair of tall, green and white jade lions were vivid and lifelike, both in the shape of young lionesses. The lioness on the right was protecting 3 young lions, symbolizing the Wangfei and her 3 children. The young lions were the eldest daughter Su Jihu, the second daughter Su Weisheng, and the youngest son Su Longxiang. The lioness on the left just lowered her head and kissed one of the young lions. The Wangfei's love and affection for her eldest son Su Fengnian had no end in life or in death. Su Fengnian stood in front of the stone lions, his eyes red. The great pillar of the country, Su Xiao, sighed softly. Every time the young Fengnian felt wronged, he would sneak here and stay the whole night. No matter how cold or hot it was, he never fell sick. The tomb of the princess consort was surrounded by 2 walls made of white jade, forming the image of a city within a city. The main divine path was 600 feet long. According to the rules, there were only 9 types of stone beasts placed on both sides of the Emperor Divine Path, but there were 14 types here. There were nearly 100 stone carvings, all of which were full of vigor and vigor. They were linked together and had an imposing aura. Other than that, the height of the mausoleum and the scale of the underground palace far exceeded that of any of the vassals in the dynasty. Furthermore, the mausoleum was constructed with a dressing table and 2 maids' tombs that were unique and unprecedented. When the mausoleum was first built, it was criticized by countless people. The emperor's imperial study was filled with impeachment memorials almost overnight, but they were all suppressed and ignored. The crippled Dezugwo stood silently in front of the grave. After Su Fingnian paid his respects, he squatted in front of the grave and said softly, "Father, I'll stay a little longer." Dezugwo said gently, "Don't catch a cold. Your mother will be worried." Su Fingnian grunted in acknowledgement. The king of Bailiang walked on the main divine path and counted silently in his heart. It was exactly 365 steps. This one and only Dezugwo, who was powerful enough to overturn the court, clearly remembered that when he first entered the court and received his title, he walked from the red-painted door to the door of the Kuinji Hall. The first time he was young and vigorous, he walked 284 steps. Later on, when he got older and was crippled, he walked more and more, slower and longer, but he never exceeded 365 steps. After 40 years of military service, he had reached his current position. Su Shao had a clear conscience and did not fear the heavens, the earth, or the gods. Dezugwo walked out of the main divine path and turned his head to look. That child was definitely humming that little song, the ballad of the spring goddess, which the child's mother had taught him. Su Shao thought of the secret letter that had been urgently delivered to his desk last night in the middle of the night. He was hesitant about whether to hand it over or not. Fingnian had just turned 20, so this letter came at a very bad time. The king of Bailiang walked along the small path to the top of Mount Qingliang. He seemed to be alone, but there were actually countless hidden sentries along the way. Not to mention the carefully selected valiant soldiers in the army, there were 3 first-rank masters who were only 2 ranks away from the great Grand Master realm. Su Shao believed that his head was still worth some gold. When he was young, he felt that dying on the battlefield and being taken away by the enemy was not a big deal. It was also a happy thing to be buried in horsehide. The higher the rank of nobility, the more he cherished it. This was not purely because he was afraid of death, but because Su Shao had always believed that the glory and splendor he had today was all because of his countless brothers risking their lives. If he went to the underworld too early, he would be letting down those brave souls who were buried so hastily north and south of the great river. Especially since most of these people had families and families, he had to take care of them to be at ease. A tall tree attracts the strong wind, and a fallen tree attracts the strong wind. Aristocratic families were no different from dynasties. He walked into the Yellow Crane Tower, which was a bit cold and cheerless. He climbed to the top of the mountain and then climbed to the top of the tower, just like this prince with a different surname, who had lived a splendid life. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, and did not pat the railings with his hands behind his back, just looking at the night view of the city. He had 2 sons and 2 daughters, 300,000 steel cavalry under his command, 6 adopted sons, martial art masters in the prince's mansion were as numerous as the clouds, countless advisors and think tanks, his disciples and old officials spread throughout the imperial court, from top to bottom. One by one, his secret chess pieces were placed in all directions. Of course, there were also countless political enemies. Wasn't that little girl surnamed Fan a blind sparrow who walked right into the trap? However, Su Shao was too lazy to care about such small characters. Bailiang's military affairs were already busy enough. Every few years, there would be smoke rising from the border, but most of it was personally lit by him. He also had to deal with the rustling of leaves in the wind in the imperial city. He had long since forgotten about the affairs of Jianghu. Su Shao rubbed his hands together. He accidentally remembered a poem he heard when he was young. Unfortunately, he could only remember fragments. He could not remember what he saw in the imperial city. However, Su Xiao always remembered the last line, 50 years of great work, tell the mountain ghosts. Standing in the empty corridor of the Yellow Crane Tower, Su Xiao waited until the dawn of the eastern sky. Only then did he say softly, "Yin, send the letter to Fingnian. After all, he has already gone through his coronation." There was no overt response. Su Xiao patiently waited for the sun to rise from the east. The Pillar Country had 12 elite men of sacrifice, using the 12 earthly branches as code names. When the eldest son, Su Fingnian, was born, he began to train another group of men of sacrifice for his descendants, named after the heavenly stems. Unfortunately, he had only trained 4 so far. During his son's travels, 2 more died in battle. Gathering the 10 men of A, B, C, D, Wu, Ji, Gung, Xian, Ren, and Gue was becoming more and more distant. Fortunately, the Pillar State was very satisfied with the 2 special chess pieces other than the heavenly stems men of sacrifice. The oldest of these children was no more than 25 years old, and the youngest was only 12 years old. They were secretly trained with great financial and material resources. Perhaps their martial arts were not as good as the lower first pin masters, but their killing techniques were not bad at all. Only by killing could one save. Su Xiao was more convinced of this than anyone else. When Su Xiao went downstairs, he asked, "Ugly. Can Yuan Suozong be convinced by my son? What about Qin Jibao?" In the dark, a hoarse voice like a blunt knife grinding stone came. "My lord, no." Su Xiao rubbed his temples and smiled. "If this king remembers correctly, Qin Jibao saved your life in the battle of Princess Luoyang's tomb. With such a friendship, don't you know how to smooth things over for him? Aren't you afraid that he will suddenly die today?" Silence. Loyalty, filial piety, and righteousness. In Bailiang, this order could not be messed up. Whoever messed up would die. If Ugly, who was destined to hide behind the scenes forever, smoothed things over for Qin Jibao, it was nothing more than a small matter of sacrificing one more life. Su Xiao's thoughts were unpredictable. He said to himself, "Villain butcher." Chapter 34. Su Fingnian woke up early in the morning. Even with his eyes closed, he could feel the comfort of the brocade bedding. This made him very content. He had never starved or suffered from a cold before, so it was very difficult for him to understand the bliss of having a full and warm stomach. Hunger cures all diseases. No matter how sincere his parents' persuasion was, it was impossible for them to express this feeling. Back at the Yellow Crane Tower, Su Fingnian told Li Hanlin and Yan Qiji about their 3 years of travels. The 2 childhood friends were only curious about the anecdotes of Jianghu and the Wulin world, and had no feelings about the cold and hunger. Therefore, Su Fingnian, whose hands and feet were still full of calluses, was very glad that he was able to return to Liangzhou alive. He had just sat up when Sweet Potato, the housekeeper who lived on the small couch next door, came in to help him put on his clothes and hat. Su Fingnian did not refuse. As Sweet Potato's slender hands moved, she softly reminded him that there was an extra secret letter on the table. Su Fingnian grunted. Within the aristocratic families, overstepping the rules was a big taboo. No matter how favored a maid or concubine was, they would not dare to be careless. Su Fingnian got out of bed and rinsed his mouth and face before gently opening the letter. This kind of thing was not common. Wudong Garden was not a place that anyone could enter. There was a small seal character written on the outside of the envelope, Yin. Su Fingnian was not surprised by this. It was an open secret that his father had the 10 death warriors of the earthly branch by his side. Each of them was like a demon that could not see the light of day. They were skilled in the art of divination. They walked the unorthodox path and killed people without leaving a trace. Su Fingnian realized that this letter was similar to an itinerary introduction. The words were straightforward and recorded Old Huang's trip to the Eastern Sea in detail. When Su Fengnian saw that Old Huang had entered the martial Emperor city's territory, which was under the jurisdiction of the Eastern Lin dynasty's stone platform and the vast sea. Because of Yin, Su Fengnian added some secret news that didn't belong to Old Huang. For example, a few of the world's famous swordsmen had already entered the martial Emperor city. Other than the head of the Yuang sword pool, 2 of the Wu clan's sword tomb, who rarely entered the world, had left the mountain and entered the Eastern Sea. They were looking forward to the peak battle on the city wall. The next article even mentioned that the renowned first-rank expert, Chao Guanzi, had rented an entire sea-viewing pavilion in the martial Emperor city. Even though Su Fengnian did not personally experience it, he could clearly feel the suffocating feeling of dark clouds pressing down on the city. The second-to-last chapter described how Old Huang rested for a moment at a wine shop not far from the main city tower. He ordered 2 taels of wine, half a caddy of meat, and a plate of peanuts. This Old Huang was still a good person who was neither warm nor angry. Only the last chapter of the Yin spy record was left. Su Fengnian was not in a hurry to continue reading, but he remembered many things that had happened in the past 3 years. The biggest was encountering bandits and robbers, but the smaller ones were innumerable. They were nothing more than refugees trying to solve the problem of food and clothing, swindling and stealing. They used all the tricks they could think of, but it was a pity that not only did they not gain anything, they also had to be chased and beaten. From the beginning, they would try to strike up a conversation with a pretty lady. In the end, they would take a detour when they saw a pretty lady. From being picky, they would say that the meat was not exquisite enough, and the wine was not mellow enough. In the end, they would thank the heavens if they had a mouthful of hot tea that tasted a little meaty. It was a world of difference. He had borrowed 2 tattered Taoist robes and pretended to be a poor alchemist, telling people's fortunes. In the alley, he had played the 19 Go games that had not yet been spread among the common folk. In the end, he did not make much money. Instead, he lost a few copper coins to a few villains who were good at wooden go. He sold calligraphy and paintings, and also helped the villagers write letters to their families. It was rare to have the good luck of not being chased and beaten by the villagers for stealing chickens and dogs. Eldest young master, these are cucumbers stolen from the vegetable garden near the village. They can be eaten raw. Ba ba ba, can this thing be eaten? His Royal Highness, covered in dust, sat on a small mound and threw the cucumber that he had bitten into far away. After waiting for the time it takes to burn an incense stick, His Royal Highness weakly waved at Old Huang, who was squatting beside him and chewing on the cucumber. Sigh, Old Huang, help me pick up that cucumber. I really don't have the strength to get up. Young master, this is corn on the cob. It's better to roast it than to eat raw cucumbers. Cut the crap and eat. Old Huang, what did you dig out from the ground? Sweet potatoes. Can it be eaten raw? Yes. It's really F***king crispy and sweet. Eldest young master, can I say something? Say it. It's actually more fragrant when roasted. Damn it. Why didn't you say so earlier? Although stealing this chicken almost cost me my life, it's worth it. It's not inferior to tender yellow muntjac meat at all. It's fragrant. Old Huang, when you first entered the village, why did you keep staring at that slut's butt? Last time, you even stared at a village girl who was breastfeeding her child. What, can you see a baby just by looking at her? You don't dare to touch, you only dare to look. Useless. Old Huang, I'm not going to die, am I? If I had known, I wouldn't have touched the box in your bag. No. Eldest young master, don't think too much. People are scared by themselves. I like to think positively. Young master, think more about good wine, good meat, and that pretty lady. The more you think about it, the more you'll pass this hurdle. The more you think about it, the more you want to die. Don't. Eldest young master still owes me a few pots of rice wine. Once a man says something, even 4 oxen, 5 donkeys, and 6 horses won't be able to pull him back. In our hometown, even a loud fart can make a hole. Old Huang, it's really not funny at all. Then I'll change the joke for eldest young master. Chapter 35. Don't. You've already told me those old and dirty stories that you've heard from hearsay thousands of times. My ears are already tired of hearing them. Let's not talk about it, I'll sleep for a while. Don't worry, I won't die. In the middle. Old Huang, you've never had a wife. No, when I was young, I only knew how to do hard work, forging iron all day, but I couldn't save any copper coins. Later on, when I got older, which girl would take a fancy to me? That life was so boring and full of regrets. Fortunately, it's just like how I, Old Huang, have never tasted bird's nest or bear's paw in my life. I won't think about their taste. At most, I'll take the opportunity to take a few glances, and then I'll be satisfied. Eldest young master, isn't this the case? I couldn't tell that Old Huang knew some logic. I'm just blindly thinking. Old Huang, you said that when Hua only thought about practicing the sword all day long, but looking at his posture, he doesn't seem to have the talent to wield the sword. Eldest young master, I think that just looking isn't enough. It's just like when I went up the mountain to gather firewood when I was young. Those strong people wouldn't work after chopping for 4 hours. I'm clumsy, but if I sharpened the chopper and chopped for another 12 to 14 hours, I'll be able to carry more firewood down the mountain than them. Moreover, if I go up the mountain to gather firewood, I might be able to see some good wood. I can cut a piece and sell it for a lot of copper coins. This method is too stupid. Stupid people have to use stupid methods, or else they won't be able to live. It wasn't easy for me to be reincarnated into this world. I feel that I can't just do nothing. Sigh, I can't stand your reasoning. Right, Old Huang, if I learn the sword, will I have a future? Then won't my future be at the peak? Old Huang, when this praise comes from your mouth, I really don't feel any sense of accomplishment. Hey, how many times have I told you, don't look at me like that? The head maid, Sweet Potato, looked at His Royal Highness' expression, and the corners of her mouth curled up slightly. Su Fingnian collected his thoughts and finally opened the last chapter. Ninth sword. Huang carried the case and leaped onto the wall, standing 20 feet away from Wang Xianji, 5 swords in the case, 8 sword moves. Wang Xianji dealt with it with one hand. A total of 68 moves. Ninth sword. Wang Xianji raised her right hand. Saber 9 was like the Milky Way pouring down from 1,000 miles away, destroying Wang Xianji's right sleeve. Wang Xianji fought with all her might. Jianzhou Wang single-handedly broke through 49 moves until he died. Addendum 1, Jianzhou Wang's meridians were severed. He sat cross-legged on top of the city wall, his head facing north. He died but did not fall. Addendum 2, after this battle, no one in the world would dare to say that the ninth sword Huang is inferior to the sword god Dong Tai. Inside the Seaview Tower, Chao Guanzi praised the use of the ninth sword style. The sword intent was so vast that there was no better sword move in the world. Addendum 3, the ninth sword's name is 6,000 miles, as told by the ninth sword himself. Addendum 4, Jianzhou Wang seemed to have said something before he died, but only Wang Xianji heard it. Su Fingnian kept his head lowered as he stared at the letter. Looking at the side of his face, there was nothing unusual. After a moment of silence, he finally said softly, "Sweet Potato, boil some yellow rice wine." This was not the time to boil rice wine, and the crabs and bass in the lake were still small. Thus, the head maidservant said softly, "Your Highness, are you going to drink now?" Su Fingnian nodded and said, "Yes, I want to drink." Sweet Potato was clever and didn't ask any questions. She went to the cellar of Wudong Garden and brought out a pot of old yellow rice wine from Mount Wuxia. She boiled a pot for His Royal Highness and brought it to the small sandalwood table on the bamboo couch facing the window on the second floor of Wudong Garden. Su Fengnian asked for 2 wine cups and waved his hand to ask the maidservants, including Sweet Potato and Green Ant, to leave. The entire second floor, which was filled with priceless antiques and paintings, became quieter and quieter. Su Fengnian poured 2 cups of yellow rice wine and sat quietly for an entire day. He didn't show any joy or sorrow on his face. As dusk approached, he caught a glimpse of the embroidered winter saber that had been neglected for a long time. Su Fengnian got down from the bamboo couch and took off the embroidered winter saber that was even more beautiful than the Wenqi saber. He unsheathed the saber and the cold air seeped into his skin. That time, he recklessly stole old Huang's sword box and was half dead that day. It was enough to see how heavy the sword aura inside the box was. The embroidered winter saber and the other swords were all good weapons for cutting off people's heads. They couldn't be compared to the gold and jade ornaments worn by the dandy of Liangzhou. Perhaps even the housekeepers and servants who entered the residence later couldn't imagine that His Royal Highness, who only knew how to seek pleasure all day long, had touched a saber for the first time at the age of 6. Su Fengnian carried the saber downstairs and saw a group of maidservants gathered in the courtyard with worried expressions. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Go do your own things. It's good to put on a show. Otherwise, if Chief Steward Shen sees this, he'll grumble about how Wudong Garden has no rules." Su Fengnian quickly walked into the bedroom and took out the cardinal box from under the bed. He found the stack of silk that used charcoal to draw the sword aura. It was exactly the same as the cardinal box and had become a relic. Su Fengnian didn't want anyone to disturb him. He focused on reading it the entire night. After putting the simple sword manual back into the box, Su Fengnian raised his head and saw that his father, Su Shao, had been sitting at the side for some time. Su Shao asked, "Can you understand it?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "I don't understand. Old Huang's drawing skills are too bad and my comprehension is even worse." Su Shao smiled and said, "You want to learn the sword?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "I want to learn." No one knew a son better than his father. Su Shao asked, "After you learn the sword, you want to go to the martial emperor's city and get the 6 swords back?" Su Fengnian said calmly, "There's no reason to leave it there and let people laugh at old Huang." Su Shao said indifferently, "Then can you get it back before you're 50 years old?" Su Fengnian sighed and said, "Only the heavens know." Su Shao didn't comfort him at all. He just stood up and left with a casual expression and said, "Think carefully before you tell father." Su Fengnian looked at his father's back and asked, "What did old Huang say in the end?" Su Shao stopped and didn't turn around. He said, "Let's talk about it after you've learned it." Actually, what old Huang said wasn't important. He was gone. 6,000 miles of wind and clouds. The sword box was erected at the top of the city wall. But the dozen or so jugs of yellow wine were still there. Chapter 36. Su Fengnian really picked up the martial arts that he used to despise the most. But before he learned the sword, he learned the knife first. Of course, he learned from the white-haired old man. The old man was about to leave the Wang mansion to wander the Jianghu. He had long been itching for a fight with the top 10 masters who squatted in the latrine but did not shit much. He wanted to fight with the last 9 masters before he went to fight with the old man Wang. The old man hated this old man the most. If he was the best in the world, then he was the best. Why was he pretending to be the second best? How hateful. The old man, who was gnawing on a lamb leg, heard that Su Fengnian wanted to learn the knife from him. He laughed wildly and spat out a mouthful of lamb shredded on the ground. The old man saw that His Royal Highness did not seem to be joking. He threw away the lamb leg and stroked the scarlet knife he had asked a master to hook into his shoulder blade with his oily hand. He asked, "Why should Grandpa teach you?" Su Fengnian replied, "I asked Su Xiao to invite Wei Beishan, who used the Zanmadeo, to Beiliang to spar with you. From now on, we will meet once a year until I learn the knife." The old man praised him for his generosity. He looked up at Su Fengnian and asked with a strange smile, "Boy, tell Grandpa why you want to learn the knife. Are the 300,000 strong cavalry in Beiliang not enough for you to show off?" Su Fengnian pulled out Shudong and flicked it with his fingers. He grinned and said, "Those people's knives and spears belong to others. I also want to find one that is convenient for me." The old man curled his lips and did not comment. He only asked Su Fengnian to lift Shudong with one arm and stand for an hour. The knife could not be tilted. Otherwise, even if old man Wang was invited, he would not accept this cheap disciple. In the end, Su Fengnian held on for an hour and fainted on the spot. Shudong did not tilt at all. To be precise, it did not even tremble. The old man stared blankly at His Royal Highness. He walked over and pinched the boy's stiff right arm. He clicked his tongue and said, "I found a treasure." After that, old Kuei didn't teach Su Fengnian any profound moves. He only made him repeat 4 boring movements: straight stab, diagonal slash, vertical chop, and back sweep. Stab 3,000, lift 3,000, hack 4,000, sweep 4,000. The old man thought that Su Fengnian, who was used to eating and drinking, would at least ask a few questions. However, Su Fengnian did not. Every day, he would go to the secluded courtyard at dawn to practice his knife. Every night, he would stagger away. Shudong did not leave him for even a moment. This made the old man very depressed. At the same time, he was curious. Su Fengnian showed not only his willpower but also his solid foundation in holding the knife. Could it be that His Royal Highness had been carefully trained by a military general? Did he learn the military's fierce knife for self-defense? During this period of time, he deliberately made things difficult for Su Fengnian to practice holding the knife. Half of it was to let the boy know that there was no shortcut in knife skills in the world. The other half was sincere. The first thing to practice the knife was to hold the knife. If one could not even hold the knife, then it was not using the knife, but being dragged by the knife. Even if one had a lot of peerless knife manuals, they could only play some seemingly fancy moves. Once they were faced with an enemy, only death would await them. The first day to practice the knife was the Great Summer. After the Great Summer came the beginning of autumn. From beginning to end, Su Fengnian practiced his saber with his upper body bare. His soft and smooth skin, which had been nourished with great difficulty, was tanned into a bronze color. He was even more robust. If he had some scars, he would be no different from a soldier. However, his knife skills were far from being mainstream. After the white dew and the cold dew, there was frost. The sweep of 4,000 became the sweep of 6,000. Su Fengnian finally asked the first question. The knife is the courage of 100 soldiers. It is open and closed. It emphasizes that although there are thousands of soldiers and tens of thousands of horses, this sweep of back is to withdraw the knife skills. Why do I have to practice more? The old man smiled and said, "There are too many knife men in the world who are not afraid of death. However, the knife men who are not afraid of death are the easiest to die. The most powerful sweep of back in the world cannot escape the sweep of back. How can there be a good knife skill that takes the life of anyone with the knife?" Grandpa's great principles were all thought up on my way back from wandering outside the palace of the King of Hell. Learn from it. There were mountains of knife skills and knife manuals in the armory. However, from the first day Su Fengnian practiced the knife, he did not set foot in the Tide Listening Pavilion, which was regarded as the holy land of martial arts by the martial artists of Jianghu. The old man was very gratified by this. The path of knife skills was not like the way of heaven that the child martial granduncle of Wudong Mountain practiced. The most important thing was that dripping water could penetrate a rock. As for how to choose the heart sutras to complement each other and cultivate both internal and external, the old man was not worried about this. The butcher Su Shao had a lot of crooked ways. The problem was, how long could His Royal Highness last until that day? After Lidong, until the Great Winter, even if the surface of the lake froze, Su Fengnian would be brought to the bottom of the lake by the old man to practice his knife skills. The time he spent holding his breath became longer and longer. His knife skills had not reached a higher level, but he had developed water skills first. Recently, a few bands of roaming bandits had appeared outside the city, clamoring and causing trouble right under the eyes of the Great Pillar State. This was simply provoking the Almighty. However, there were rumors in the city that these bands of bandits were not trampled into meat paste by the Bailiang cavalry. Instead, they were slaughtered by a machete man wearing a ferocious mask. Chapter 37. The bystanders in the city would always say that it was a pity that His Royal Highness had not seen him in the past 6 months. Otherwise, he would have been greatly rewarded. As for those nobles in the city, they were all at a loss. Not to mention who that sneaky swordsman was. Who was he? Where did those bandits come from? Although it was not true that de Zhugua did not pick up any leftovers, he would not believe that the rumors were true that the northern barbarians were causing trouble in Bailiang. On the 28th day of the lunar calendar, Su Fengnian followed de Zhugua to Mount Jiuhua, the Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva's dojo. This time, he would be the one to ring the bell. He took off his armor and climbed up the mountain. He spent the night in the 1000 Buddha pavilion on the top of the mountain. Su Fengnian took the time to read the thick letter from the Immortal of Longhu Mountain. Su Fengnian smiled. The letter said that Huang Man saw hawthorns all over the mountain and brought them back to his master's place. As a result, the courtyard was filled with hawthorns. Fortunately, the respected immortal on the mountain did not dare to reprimand him. He only kindly explained that the hawthorns could not be stored for long after they were picked. It was better to wait until they went down the mountain to pick them. As a result, Huang Man almost destroyed the house. Su Shao was not asleep. He walked into the room and glanced at the winter embroidery saber on the table. He held another letter in his hand. It was from his second daughter, Su Weisheng. De Zhugua said bitterly, "Your second sister wrote a letter to scold me." Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Just because I learned martial arts and the saber?" Su Shao sat down and sighed. "If you continue to practice, she might come back from the Shangyin Academy and scold me." Su Fengnian did not read the letter. He just gloated and said, "What did she say?" Su Shao squinted and said, "She asked me to ask you, so what if you are the best at using the saber?" Su Fengnian thought about it and said, "Just write back and say that it can strengthen your body. You can't let your body be hollowed out by beauty." Su Shao said awkwardly, "Isn't this reason a bit too childish?" Su Fengnian said confidently, "This is the only way to deal with second sister. Otherwise, do you think you can win against her when it comes to reasoning with her?" Su Shao gave a thumbs up and flattered, "You didn't learn this blade for nothing." On the morning of the 29th, mountain fog filled the air. Su Fengnian placed his hands on the hilt of his winter-embroidered saber and looked into the distance. After Lidong, the several groups of bandits were all wooden training dummies arranged by his father, Su Shao. Su Shao did not give any hint, but Su Fengnian naturally guessed that most of them were criminals sentenced to death in the Bailiang army who had committed a major offense. Su Shao was very strict in his management of the army and was very clear about rewards and punishments. Even his adopted son, Chen Jibao, who had violated the law, was publicly whipped until he was covered in blood. If not for this, the rumors in the capital would not have spread that the Bailiang army only recognized the Liangwang tiger seal and not the emperor's jade seal. These military criminals who were temporarily acting as bandits did not inherit any orthodox martial arts, but their skills were all obtained by risking their lives on the battlefield. They were ferocious and had the unique fearlessness of the Bailiang cavalry. They were most suitable for Su Fengnian to practice his straightforward and fierce saber skills. The old man saw Su Fengnian kill 3 groups with his own eyes. After that, he did not pay any more attention. He only gave the address and had Su Fengnian go there alone with his saber. After the first group of bandits, Su Fengnian was hit 6 times, 5 light and 1 heavy. The one that hit his back was not fatal. He lay in a pool of blood, his saber still in his hand. In the end, he was carried back to the prince's mansion by the old man. After that, the other groups of Su Fengnian fought with injuries. The old man did not give him the slightest chance to be lazy or complain. If it were any other master raised by the prince's mansion, they would not dare to trample on his royal highness, whose nobility was comparable to that of the emperor's relatives. Practicing the saber with the fierce bandits was difficult and dangerous. It was not something that outsiders could understand. Su Fengnian closed his eyes and slowed his breathing. He wondered if it was time to start practicing internal martial arts. No matter how domineering the saber technique of the outer sect was, it was like a child's play in front of a true master of both internal and external martial arts. It would only be a joke. However, the cultivation of internal martial arts was more about advancing step by step. The big and small acupoints and meridians in the body had to be polished and connected like a marching army. It was like the Wudang sect, which claimed that half of the world's internal martial arts came from the Jade Pillar. Especially those Taoist priests who were talented and had masters to guide them, they had to practice every day they were on the mountain. They had to strive to reach the realm of the Great Way where they could resonate with the heavenly design. Internal energy was not food that could be stuffed to the brim. Where could Su Fengnian find the precious internal energy that he had spent 10 or 20 years to polish? Should he go to the Tide Listening Pavilion and look for some evil ways? Su Fengnian frowned and opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with the sea of clouds and his ears were filled with the sound of pines. He felt relaxed and happy. For some reason, he thought of the previous owner of the winter embroidery saber. He wondered when that white fox face would ascend to the 3rd floor. Would this beauty think that the winter embroidery saber was given to the wrong person? That year when it was snowing heavily, White Fox Face wielded the saber on the lake. That was the true path of the saber. Su Fengnian knew the difference between heaven and earth, but he was not discouraged. An old man with missing front teeth who always laughed foolishly once said that it was comfortable to fart after a full meal. However, it was more comfortable to fart one after another and take it slow. His current practice of the saber was the stupidest way. It was time to ring the morning bell. Because Su Fengnian had been practicing his saber, the sound of the bell was loud and clear. There were a total of 108 bell rings in one day. Qi Danghua, who was in charge of the Beiliang army, looked surprised. Among the other foster sons, Yao Jian and Yi Shizhen looked at each other and smiled. Chu Lushan's eyes almost popped out. As for the little people Chen Jibao, Zhou Xiong, and Yuan Zhuozong, they were patrolling the border and did not appear. The group walked down Mount Jiuhua. De Zhugua, who was walking side by side with Su Fengnian, said slowly, "If you really want to practice martial arts, the masters in the mansion know some unorthodox ways. It depends on whether you are willing to put down your airs." Su Fengnian laughed involuntarily. "What airs can I put down?" De Zhuguo looked at Mount Wudang from afar and squinted. "That's good." Chapter 38. In the first month, there were many distinguished guests who came with gifts. The governor of Lingzhou, Yan Jishi, and his children arrived together. The governor of Feng province, Li Gongda, followed closely behind. Naturally, he brought his son, Li Hanlin, who had a terrible reputation. Because their sons and His Royal Highness were childhood friends, the two governors had a deep relationship. They were fortunate enough to be looked upon highly by the king of Beiliang. Whenever they made mistakes in governance, the Great Pillar Guo would lightly overlook them. Among them, Yan Jieshi had an advantage that others envied. The governor of Yan province had a daughter who was both talented and beautiful. Even the great pillar Guo praised her, personally commenting that she was steady and peaceful, generous. At that time, many people believed that this girl would enter Bailiang Palace. It was probably because His Royal Highness was too unrestrained, so there was no substantial movement. Today, the great pillar Guo was personally receiving the two governors. Li Hanlin could not sit still and had long been itching to make a move. The great pillar Guo waved his hand and told him to scram. Li Hanlin immediately rushed out as if he had been pardoned and did not forget to bow. The governor of Feng province, Li Gongda, sighed. This bastard was too inappropriate. The great pillar Guo laughed and said that Li Hanlin's personality was not bad. Only then did Li Gongda feel relieved. The great pillar Guo's light words were 100 times more effective than thousands of curses in the province. Yan Jiexi's daughter, Yan Dongwu, also gracefully excused herself and went for a walk in the manor. It was rare to see a woman who could receive the great pillar Guo's praise. She was recognized as a female scholar by the scholars of Bailiang. She was proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, poetry, and song. She was brilliant and beautiful. If not for the fact that she was beaten by the #1 woman of Bailiang, Su Weisheng, she would be even more famous. However, from the first time she saw Su Fengnian, she did not have a good impression of him. She saw His Royal Highness as an empty bag and did not hide it. Su Fengnian, on the other hand, said that Yan Dongwu was a female prostitute who fished for fame. Although she looked friendly on the surface, she was actually sophisticated. Although she looked gentle and harmless, she was actually a knife. Whoever married her would be bringing home a knife, which would bring misfortune to the family. In short, the two of them had been at loggerheads all these years. They didn't like each other and tried to avoid meeting each other if possible. Therefore, they didn't even greet each other when they met. Her younger brother, Yan Jiaxi, originally hoped to be able to tie the knot with brother Feng, but seeing that there was no hope, he gave up. In the twilight, Yan Dongwu walked on the secluded path and sneered in her heart. She hadn't heard of His Royal Highness mischief for half a year. She heard that he was forbidden to study the sage books. She didn't believe that the pillar state could restrict Su Fengnian's feet. Who knows what kind of disaster he had caused. Yan Dongwu heard a strange voice. "Oh, this lady is so brave. You dare to tour alone in idiot Su's territory. Aren't you afraid of being robbed and humiliated by that idiot?" She didn't need to raise her head to know that it was her sworn enemy, the one who couldn't achieve anything great, the one who couldn't pass the imperial examinations. Yan Dongwu was too lazy to pay attention to it. She quickened her pace and wanted to leave early. Out of sight, out of mind. Su Fengnian didn't give up and blocked in front of her. He teased, "Lady, do you want me to protect you? Don't fall into idiot Su's evil hands. If you can't keep your chastity, who will marry you? I heard that there's a little prince in the capital who is in love with you. Could it be that you're preparing to become an imperial concubine?" Yan Dongwu glared at him. Her face was cold, but she was a little surprised in her heart. She hadn't seen this rascal for more than 3 years, and he seemed to have become much more tanned and robust. However, that hedonistic air of a person who couldn't change his nature was still as hateful as before. She was attentive. She saw that the most powerful young master in Liangzhou didn't wear a fancy sword anymore. He changed to a knife and didn't hang it on his waist. Instead, he held it in his hand, which was neither fish nor fowl. Yan Dongwu took a step back and distanced herself from Su Fengnian. She said sarcastically, "You can't learn the skills of that ferocious-looking machete man, so you can only learn the easiest way to wear a knife. His Royal Highness is so ambitious." Su Fengnian hummed a few times and turned to put Xiu Dong on his shoulder. He put his hands on her and looked even more like a ruffian. He smiled and said, "Female scholar, you've heard about that machateman's feat. Do you think I should reward him with a few thousand or 10,000 taels of silver? I heard that there will be a fight outside the city tonight. I'm thinking about how much silver I should bring. Female scholar, you're quite good at calculating. Why don't you give me some advice? Yen Dongwu sneered and said, Do you dare to see that bloody scene? How much silver to give is your highness's private matter. Dongwu kindly reminds your highness to bring an extra set of clothes. Su Fengnian clicked his tongue and said, Female scholar, you've really calculated everything. You've even calculated that I'm about to pee in my pants. You're amazing. I used to say that you don't know anything when you don't ask. Now it seems that I've misunderstood you. Yen Dongwu didn't have the patience to argue with Su Fengnian. She said coldly, Get out of my way. Su Fengnian put Xiao Dong's knife on his shoulder and said casually, Female scholar, do you dare to come with me to see that machete man? Yen Dongwu said firmly, I don't dare. Su Fengnian joked, Are you afraid of seeing me, or are you afraid of seeing the machete man and can't help but elope with him? I heard from Yen Qiji that you always like to peek at some paladin biographies. Aren't you curious what kind of hero is behind that ferocious face? Yen Dongwu was exposed, but she didn't feel embarrassed. She kept silent. Su Fengnian said regretfully, Forget it if you don't want to go. It's better for me to enjoy alone than others. Carrying Xiao Dong's knife, he brushed past Yen Dongwu. Yen Dongwu suddenly wrinkled her nose. She turned around and asked for the first time, Do you really want to be that spendthrift? Su Fengnian smiled and said, There are 2 horses in the stable. Finally, the 2 of them rode out of the city. Chapter 39. Yen Dongwu, who was wearing a thick fur coat to hide herself, was very annoyed as she galloped away. How could she be bewitched by this idiot? She had thought that there would be cavalry and retainers from the prince's mansion, but there was no sign of them after 20 miles out of the city. She curiously asked, Su Fengnian, where are you taking me? Su Fengnian held his saber with one hand and turned his head with a smile. You will know after another 20 miles. Are you still afraid that I'll take you to the wilderness to do something improper with you? Don't worry, a forced melon is not sweet. I know this better than anyone. In the starlight of the night, Yen Dongwu saw a face that seemed unfamiliar to her. Another 20 miles. She saw a bonfire flickering on the opposite side of a small hill. Su Fengnian was the first to jump up the hill. Yen Dongwu's face turned pale when she reached the top of the hill. At the foot of the slope, more than a dozen burly men were sitting and drinking wine and eating meat. All of them looked sinister. When they saw Su Fengnian, they seemed to see a big fat sheep. When they looked at Yen Dongwu, who was dressed luxuriously, their eyes were full of lust. They were scared to be thrown into this desolate place. Now that there was such a beautiful woman in front of them, they would be punished if they didn't eat her. Yen Dongwu looked at Su Fengnian's side face in a daze. Was this foppish man going to use this vicious method to take revenge on her? Su Fengnian stared at the bottom of the hill and smiled softly. Miss Yen, don't be in a hurry to kill yourself by biting your tongue. Su Fengnian is not as dirty as you think. If I hand you over to a group of dead people, Yen Qiji will break off relations with me. No matter how you look at it, I will suffer a great loss. Su Fengnian exhaled deeply. In the cold season, this wisp of white mist was particularly clear in Yen Dongwu's eyes. Then she saw this idle man, His Royal Highness, take out a ferocious mask, cover his face, pull out his saber, and insert the sheath into the soil. A series of silent actions caused his temperament to change instantly. Yen Dongwu covered her mouth and did not dare to make a sound. It was a good time to kill. On a snowy day, the corpses would soon become like icicles under the eaves and would not be dirty. Especially the puddles of dirty blood, after being frozen, would look like a woman's embroidery. This made Su Fengnian, who could only kill people quickly, very pleased. After killing 4 or 5 batches of killing, he had some experiences that were not convenient to talk to others. But when he was in Jianghu, he had no friends, otherwise, why would the masters be fighting on the top of a building or mountain? At the very least, there were a lot of people. But he was actually pleasing to the eye. Her face is yen, he was actually very pleased with her face. But her face and her face in her, he was. Her face in her. So, he. Yen, of her, yen, he. With great difficulty, Su Fengnian finally had a rare spectator other than old Kuei. He felt that it was necessary to kill her more attentively, more decisively, and more ruthlessly. It would be best if he could scare her to death. The leader of the bandits gave them a look. They were not very willing to let 2 capable but not trusted men be the vanguard. They had heard that the machete man on the hillside who specialized in killing their peers was not gentle. The bodies were rarely intact. But the leader said that as long as they killed the one wearing the mask, they could have a taste of the little woman first. This made the 2 bandits, who had been holding back for too long, not even care about their lives. Most importantly, after they were mysteriously thrown here, they learned that as long as they killed the person who wanted to kill them, they would not be sentenced to death. Not only would they receive a large reward, but they would also be able to return to the army. It was a life-or-death situation. They were hot-headed. They did not care too much. Xiao Dong collided with a fine machete in a bandit's hand. Su Fengnian leaned to the side and slid down the machete, cutting off several fingers of the charging soldier. Without waiting for the man to cry for his father and mother, Xiao Dong raised the machete and cut off a head. Xiao Dong did not stop. She rolled and cut down the second bandit at the waist. Su Fengnian charged straight into the enemy's formation. Xiao Dong moved like a snowball. In just the time it takes for an incense stick to burn. Very few of their corpses were complete. Su Fengnian finally let out a long breath. The so-called 1 spurt of energy was very reasonable. The biggest taboo when using a machete was to mess up one's chi. He began to understand. Su Fengnian took off the fanged green mask covering his face. His chi changed again, and he returned to being that sloppy and handsome young master. He flicked his wrist lightly and threw the blood on Xiao Dong's machete onto the snow. Then he carried the machete up the slope. Yan Dongwu, who was sitting on the horse's back, was trembling. She gritted her teeth and persevered, as if she was not willing to lose the noble and virtuous aura she had accumulated over the years. Su Fengnian glanced at her and wiped the Xiao Dong's machete on her expensive fox fur coat, leaving a light mark. This rough action scared the golden branch and jade leaf into crying out in alarm. Her delicate body was about to fall. Su Fengnian did not scare this smart and blank girl. He put the Xiao Dong's machete back into its scabbard. He walked a few steps and flipped onto the horse. He said softly, "Let's go back. 40 li back to the city." Su Fengnian was in the front. Yan Dongwu, whose riding skills were average, followed behind him with great difficulty. Su Fengnian, who was on the horse's back, spent most of his time with his eyes closed and breathing deeply. Practicing the machete and killing people were secondary. The real training was still waiting for him in the small courtyard of the prince's mansion. The guard at the gate opened his eyes wide and recognized His Royal Highness. He hurriedly shouted to open the gate, afraid that if he angered this Bailiang devil incarnate, he would pack up and go home to raise chickens and farm. Su Fengnian sent Miss Yan to the governor's mansion. He said with a smile, "You have to return this horse to me." After Yan Dongwu got off the horse, she still kept quiet. Su Fengnian did not think much of it. When he bent down to take the reins from her hand, he used the Xiao Dong scabbard to pat her buttocks. He teased, "Is your soul gone?" Yan Dongwu's face was sullen. Su Fengnian used the Xiao Dong's machete to lift her delicate chin. He said slowly, your father sent a letter to Wang Taibao in the capital. It's on Su Zhao's desk. Therefore, you didn't go in vain when you put down your pride and went out of the city with me, His Royal Highness, to admire the snow. Yan Dongwu's eyes were flustered. Su Fengnian smiled frivolously and threw the green-faced mask in his arms to her. Miss Yan gave me face tonight. As a gift in return, I'll give this to you. If you hate me in the future, you can take it out on me. Chapter 40. Inside the Tide Listening Pavilion, de Zhugua saw the two of them leave the residence with his own eyes. He smiled as he returned to the pavilion and sat opposite the chief advisor Li Yishan. He asked softly, Brother Yuanying, do you think this rascal will cheat more of the little girl from the Yen family or save that bookworm Yen Qiji's family of 69 people? Li Yishan said calmly, both. Su Xiao smiled, is the position of Lingzhou's magistrate so worthless? That old fellow Yan Jieshi is too much of an armchair strategist. Does he think that by forming a relationship with Wang Taibao, even if his daughter is lucky enough to become the imperial concubine, she can escape from my hands? Does he think he can bring me down by hiding under the emperor's feet and complaining about me? He didn't even think about who gave him the money he earned in Liangdi. Without this money, what can he use to win over Wang Taibao and become brothers with that Han Diaoxi from the inner palace? On this point, Li Gongda is much smarter. He still remembers who is his true source of income. Only this kind of person can live long. Li Shan said calmly, how can there be so many docile dogs for you to order around? Occasionally, a few crazy dogs will jump out and jump over the wall. Isn't that what you want? If Liangdi is peaceful every year, there won't be soldiers training horses at the borders. Without Yan Jieshi and the other so-called loyal ministers who are ready to make trouble, wouldn't your position be even more difficult? Aren't there a lot of ministers who are busy tarnishing their own reputations for the rest of their lives? You are already very good. You can even reject the marriage of the princess. The scholars of the world have scolded you for 10 to 20 years and they still haven't broken your spine. You should be proud. De Zhugua was calm and did not make any comments. Li Shan mocked himself slightly, that rascal is less feminine but more ruffian. Not long after Su Fengnian returned to the Fu, he came upstairs to deliver wine and was pulled into a few rounds of chess. In the end, Li Shan was very angry. To Li Shan, no matter how the game of Go changed, no matter how many paths there were, it was still a dead object. No matter how big the situation was, it was still a ghost trap. Li Shan did not like it. However, Su Fengnian was naughty when he was young and could not calm his heart down. If he wanted to nail this rascal's butt to the mat, the only way was to search and search. That was the only way. Privately, Li Shan admired the boy's extraordinary memory. When the two of them played chess, at first, there were still chess pieces on the board, but later on, they removed the chess pieces and just pretended to be placed in the air. There were 19 vertical and 19 vertical positions. They agreed on the position of the chess pieces in advance and could not go back on their words. Who would have thought that after returning from this trip, Su Fengnian would learn an endless stream of unreasonable hand tendons from who knows where. The more he learned, the more violent his fists became. Li Shan was in a difficult situation a few times, he almost smashed this reckless brat with his wine pot. Li Shan, who was sitting cross-legged, was slightly helpless. He smiled faintly and said, we have 10 rounds of listening to the tide and it looks like it will be 4 wins and 4 losses. This rascal did as I wished and picked up martial arts. However, he beat me in chess. Su Xiao laughed and said, there are still 2 rounds left. No rush, no rush. Li Shan raised his brush but stopped in the air. He asked, the Chancellor of Shangyin Academy wants to play chess with you. Su Xiao laughed and said, yes. Li Shan sneered and said, back then, they used the 9 nations as chess pieces and half of the world as the chessboard. How bold. However, I didn't see them make any brilliant moves. They were arrogant but incompetent, sitting and discussing the Tao. After being defeated by you, all the arrangements and chess momentum are gone. Su Xiao said, Wei Xiong is still studying there. I have to give him some face. Otherwise, you also know my temperament. The spirit of a scholar and the spirit of righteousness are the two things that stink the most to me. Li Shan smiled and didn't say anything. Su Xiao suddenly asked, Do you think Black Tortoise is going to flourish or not? Li Shan asked back, Wang Zhongluo has wasted his time cultivating the difficult Great Yellow Court Pass. Aren't you afraid that Wudong Mountain will fall out with you? Su Xiao laughed it off. In the secluded courtyard of the prince's mansion, Su Fengnian and the old man sat cross-legged in the courtyard's corridor. They slowly recounted every detail of the battle in the snow. If the knife wasn't decisive enough, if the knife's speed was too fast and didn't have enough energy left, or if the response wasn't appropriate and wasted a bit of energy, the old man would beat him with the back of the knife. After the lesson, he would give a few concise comments. The old man was an expert in using the knife to the extreme. Even if he wasn't there, listening to Su Fengnian's words was no different from seeing it with his own eyes. Su Fengnian didn't want to give the superior incantation and the old man didn't take the initiative to reveal his trump card. The two of them guessed each other's riddles, competing to see who had the better patience. The white-haired old man leaned against a red pillar and asked with a smile, Kid, since you are going to retrieve the sword case, why don't you learn the sword? Wouldn't it be more straightforward? Besides, in Jianghu, don't all young people like to carry swords? One sword comes from the east, one sword goes to the west, and so on. It sounds more powerful than using the knife. That phrase is called Yang Chun or something. Grandpa forgot it for a moment. Su Fengnian sat upright with his shudong across his knees. He chuckled and said, Yang Chun by Shui. Even in this cold land, they call you Idiot Su. You're wronged. The old man slapped his thigh with one hand and the shoulder of his Royal Highness with the other. The latter almost fell forward. He swayed and stabilized himself with great difficulty. Su Fengnian said self-deprecatingly, Grandpa, your eyesight is really ordinary. Compared to knife skills, it's worlds apart. The old man smiled and said, When Grandpa and that Samadeo Wei Beishan fight, I will really have to leave this place. Kid, have you thought about your future path? Chapter 41. Su Fengnian put his hand on the scabbard of the winter-embroidered saber and smiled bitterly, What else can I do? I'll go to the pavilion to find a quick manual of inner strength and leave it to fate. If it doesn't work, I'll just memorize all the martial arts from various sections. In the future, I'll be able to take advantage of the enemy. My foundation should be quite ordinary. It's unlikely that I'll be able to defeat 10 people with brute force like the old grandpa. If I don't use some underhanded tricks, when will I be able to go to the martial emperor city? By the way, did Wang Xianji really break the wooden bull of the older generation sword god Li Chungang with 2 fingers? The old man nodded, feeling a little sad. For the most outstanding martial artists in the world, the old monster Wang Xianji was always a mountain that they had to face. Even if they could not defeat him, as long as they could fight to a draw, they could be ranked among the top 10 masters. It was enough to show the strength of the century-old man. Su Fengnian got up slowly. He still had to get up early tomorrow. Tonight, the future imperial concubine's mansion must be in chaos. The next day, a distinguished guest came to Beiliang Palace. It was a teacher from Shangyin Academy. It was said that his position was second only to the Grand Chancellor and he was one of the 3 chancellors. The 3 of them were generally respected as Mr. Jishang. What they taught was not ordinary scriptures and classics, but the great way of the sage. The scholars of Shangyin Academy came from all over the world, regardless of region, identity, wealth, or wealth. As long as they passed the triennial examination of the academy, they could enter the academy and become a scholar of Shangyin. These scholars were also known as the Jisha scholars. Today, the Grand Chancellor of the Academy, Qi Yonglong, was the imperial preceptor. His position was extraordinary and he was elusive. The visiting chancellor was only known by the surname Wang. He taught the art of traversing in Wang Ba Lu in Shangyin Academy. He had won 2 famous debates in the world. He won the debate on name but lost the debate on heaven and man. Since then, he rarely showed up. For the past 10 years, he had only accepted the second daughter of the butcher Su Xiao, Su Weisheng, as his student. He even said that she would be his disciple in closed-door training, and that he could pass on his legacy to her, and that this lifetime was enough. From the few letters that Su Fengnian exchanged with his second sister, Su Weisheng, he vaguely learned that this Mr. Ji Shang was a chess fanatic who loved to watch chess and talk a lot. As for the depth of his knowledge, Su Fengnian did not doubt it. Since he could become second sister's master, he could not be too bad. There was a game of chess under the White Crane building. His adopted son, Yuan Zhuozong, stood in the distance. Only Su Xiao, the great pillar state, and Mr. Ji Shang, who came from afar, were chatting happily. Su Fengnian climbed to the top of the mountain and only saw Mr. Wang's side profile. Mr. Wang was thin, wearing a plain green gown, a pair of hemp shoes, and a mutton fat jade pendant around his waist. He was facing off against Su Xiao on the chessboard with a confident demeanor. His demeanor was elegant, and his imposing manner was otherworldly. His Royal Highness thought that the Chancellor of the Shangyin Academy was indeed very confident. No matter how powerful an ordinary expert was, they would not even dare to breathe loudly in front of Su Xiao. How could he be as calm and elegant as this person? An otherworldly expert was nothing more than this. Su Fengnian gathered his thoughts and approached respectfully. De Zhu Gua and Mr. Ji Shang were focused on the game. The battle on the chessboard was intense and neither of them raised their heads. Su Fengnian, who was still in awe, took a closer look and almost spat out a mouthful of blood. A great national master who was familiar with the 19 paths was perhaps immersed in the great ocean, profound, looking down from a high position. Perhaps delicate and skillful, deep and precise, each step filled with murderous intent. But the two in front of him. Su Xiao was a terrible chess player. Su Fengnian naturally knew this. When he first saw the two of them playing chess, he thought that Mr. Wang was using his elegance to deal with Su Xiao's vulgarity. He did not think that. Damn it, why did this game look like a mess? It was like 2 children rolling around in the mud fighting. It had nothing to do with the level of a national master. Looking at the situation, Mr. Ji Shang's chess skills were on par with Su Xiao's. No wonder they were so locked in battle. What Su Fengnian could not accept the most was that Mr. Wang thought that he had made a strong move. Every time he made a comment that he agreed with, something like, "Don't make useless moves, don't make mistakes. If you want to play the big game, be a big dragon and kill a big dragon." Or, when faced with difficulties, the small tip will take root and win over the support. Ha, but I don't want to point. This support is so wonderful that it can help one ascend to immortality. Su Fengnian's eyes widened. No matter how hard he tried, he could not see the beauty of the game. He could only see the continuous blurry moves. It was a terrible sight. Mr. Ji Shang stared at the 50-50 situation and said proudly, "The 3 schools of chess have a total of 18 national masters. Only Zhao Dinghen and Chen Xie cannot defeat them. The rest can compete." Su Fengnian's face could not help but twitch. Su Xiao was expressionless. He was not willing to make a move. Mr. Ji Shang finally took the time to look up and said with an amiable expression, "His Royal Highness, do you think we should abandon the Pillar of State's light piece?" Su Fengnian slowed his breathing and said with a smile, "It's hard to say. Mr. Ji Shang's layout is meticulous. I think the white piece will most likely lose." Unexpectedly, in a fit of anger, Su Xiao was forced to make a good move. Mr. Ji Shang finally felt the danger. However, instead of calmly dealing with it, he immediately reached out to pick up Su Xiao's piece and said with a thick-skinned smile, "Pillar of state, allow me to regret this move." Su Xiao seemed to be used to it. He pursed his lips, indicating for the chancellor to do it himself. Su Fengnian was a little dumbfounded. In the end, Mr. Ji Shang managed to win the game after regretting his moves more than 10 times. After watching this, Su Fengnian no longer had any respect or longing for the Yin Academy. Mr. Wang patted his butt and stood up. He said with a refreshed expression, "I have played countless games of chess in my life. Until now, I have never lost." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Mr. Ji Shang is the best national master." After the game, the national master bid farewell and went down the mountain. When he was not playing chess, his aura was indeed flawless. He had the air of an immortal. Su Fengnian was stunned. He muttered, "What do you mean by never losing?" Su Xiao laughed and scolded, "It's true that he has never lost. It's only because he only plays chess with those who are weaker than him. If he is not confident, he will tactfully watch from the sidelines." Su Fengnian said dejectedly, "Second sister is learning the art of classics from this Mr. Ji Shang." Su Xiao stood up and looked at the foot of the mountain. He smiled and said, "To be able to stand in an undefeated position, isn't he a national master?" Chapter 42. Without waiting for Su Fengnian to ask, Su Xiao told him everything. Back then, the academy was magnificent and was known as the 100 schools of thought and 3,000 sages. Actually, the ones who were truly powerful were the 9 schools of thought: Taoism, Confucianism, Dharma, Soldier, Yin and Yang. Our dynasty focused on Dharma, while the other 8 countries had their own backing. It could be said that the real war was in the Shangyin Academy. For example, Shishu was old and unambitious, occupying a natural stronghold. At that time, the academy had already unified and believed that Shishu could continue to occupy a corner. However, they were crushed by my troops. For a time, the world was filled with resentment and the nickname of the human butcher was confirmed. Together with Han Diaoxi and the Jianghu Hermit Huang Longshi, they were known as the 3 devils that everyone wanted to kill. My relationship with the academy has always been poor. Only that Mr. Ji Shang, whose chess skills are terrible, spoke up for me and said a lot of things that offend the world. At that time, Sir Wang had just won the debate on name and reality and was in the limelight. If there were no accidents, he could have become the next Grand Chancellor and planted a karma tree in the forest of virtue. What a pity. That's why I sent your second sister to Shangyin Academy. There were a few famous forbidden grounds and sacred grounds in the dynasty. Other than the imperial palace, there was also Mount Longhu, which had usurped the orthodox position of Wudang Taoism. There was also the northern Liang Mansion's Tide Hark Armory, the 2 Zen temples' relic pagoda, the Wu family's sword tomb, and lastly, the Shangyin Academy's Dao de Forest, which all the scholars in the world yearned for. This Dao de Forest symbolized 10 years of trees and 1,000 years of virtue. As for the 3 devils, the eunuch with the surname Han was called a cat. His reputation in the dynasty was only slightly worse than that of Su Xiao. However, the white-robed Huang Longshi was the most controversial. His hands were not stained with much blood, even less than some of the Jianghu heroes. But this person's mouth was really powerful. During the chaos of the 9 countries, more than half of it was started by him. He was the proudest disciple of Shangyin Academy and called himself Huang Sanjia. This was not him boasting. Huang Longshi was recognized as number 1 in the 19 Daos, number 1 in cursive script, and number 1 in Yin and Yang divination. He was renowned throughout the world. In the end, it was widely spread among scholars that the Shangyin Academy had almost erected a stone tablet that Huang Longshi could never set foot on in his lifetime. As for Su Fengnian's second sister, Su Weisheng, many scholars in the academy secretly said that she was the second Huang Longshi. One could see her elegant demeanor. Su Xiao said softly, Mr. Wang came here today to ask for a favor, but I didn't agree. Su Fengnian said helplessly, you really don't give Shangyin Academy any face. The hunchbacked and lame de Zhuguo had his hands in his sleeves. He looked like an old farmer, but his words were extremely arrogant. Those scholars have been scolding me from thousands of miles away. They've been scolding me until now, and I've already spat out several large vats of saliva. Your second sister slaps their faces in their house every day, loud and clear. In terms of Dao, they can't win against your second sister. It's even more so when it comes to chess. As for fighting, your second sister's sword can chop up those weak scholars. She can chop up hundreds of them in one breath and there won't be a wrinkle on her sword. Those fellows from Shangyin Academy are only good at scolding people. As for chopping people, they're pretty lame. Su Fengnian said with a headache, don't hit people in the face. You're good. Su Xiao smiled. Your father hasn't studied much, so how can he understand so many great principles? Su Fengnian said disdainfully, that's pretentious. Su Xiao turned his head and glanced at the winter-embroidered knife in his son's hand. He smiled and said, I'm really not pretentious. Using the knife to talk is the most effective. Su Fengnian said softly, that's also how you talk to that person in the capital. Su Xiao always had no inhibitions when interacting with this son of his. He said straightforwardly, of course. 300,000 Bailiang cavalry. Even their farts will shake the heavens. Even if you don't want to, you can smell it. Su Fengnian was preparing to leave for the bottom of the lake to practice his knife skills. He couldn't possibly go along with, the emperor will take turns to be the emperor and come to my house tomorrow, could he? Su Xiao asked, are you really going to keep practicing? Su Fengnian was puzzled. Or else. Su Xiao pulled his hand out and exhaled. He slowly kept him in suspense. Then go to Wudong. There's someone waiting for you. Su Fengnian was surprised. You're not going to ask me to learn the Jade Pillar Heart Sutra from Hong Xixiang? That's too shameful. The scenery of the colored glass world is not bad, but to ask me to practice my knife skills there, it's not fun. If he doesn't go down the mountain, I'll go up the mountain. How can it be like if the mountain doesn't come, I'll go up the mountain? To be honest, I'm not in the mood. I'd rather be scolded by that old man and have my face covered in spittle than live under someone else's roof on Wudong Mountain. De Zhuguo smiled faintly. That little Daoist with the surname Hong doesn't have that kind of ability. The one you want to see is Wudong's chief, Wang Zhongluo. Su Fengnian was shocked. That old Daoist who hides to cultivate the Great Yellow Court Pass. Did he really split the Kanglan River with a finger of an immortal? That's too immortal. Inconceivable, inconceivable. De Zhuguo thought about it and said, I haven't seen it with my own eyes, but Wang Zhongluo almost single-handedly fought against Mount Longhu with 4 great heavenly masters. He shouldn't be someone who fishes for fame. Moreover, Li Shan gave pointers in his early years. He did a general evaluation and rouge evaluation. He specifically mentioned this Daoist expert, saying that he has the potential to enter the profound understanding realm. You have to know that at that time, Wang Zhongluo was only a middle-aged Daoist with no obvious reputation. As for whether it's true or not, won't you find out when you go to Wudong Mountain? Su Fengnian was confused. Wang Zhongluo is going to teach me how to use the knife. That's impossible. Then he's going to teach me the fastest and most profound heart technique of Wudong? Su Xiao smiled. You'll know when you get there. Su Fengnian didn't refuse. Wang Zhongluo was one of the most famous experts in the world. It was always a good thing to be able to experience some of the Daoist's immortal aura. He hoped that it wouldn't be another otherworldly expert like Mr. Wang from Shangyin Academy. The most important thing was that Su Fengnian was hiding at the bottom of the lake to practice his knife. He remembered that there was a bottomless white elephant pond in Wudong. This pond was formed by a waterfall for hundreds and thousands of years. Su Fengnian wanted to go there to practice his knife. That year, Su Fengnian entered Wudong alone in the dusk. Under the black tortoise Dang Xing Memorial Arch, there were only two Taoists who were very different in age. One of them was naturally the young martial granduncle Hong Shixiang. The other was an old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion. He was extremely tall and sturdy. He was not inferior to the old man at the bottom of the lake. This kind of physique was rare in Taoism. Seeing Su Fengnian holding the knife, the two Taoists didn't exchange pleasantries. They just silently led His Royal Highness up the mountain. Climbing a mountain was physical work. In the past, Su Fengnian needed to rest a few times halfway up the mountain. After practicing his knife for half a year, he had improved a lot. However, he still couldn't reach the top in one go. Every time Su Fengnian felt tired, the tall old Taoist would stop immediately. When he stopped, Hong Shixiang also stopped. Su Fengnian sneered in his heart. This way of doing things was more scheming than hundreds of ox-nosed old Taoists coming out together. The three of them stopped at the hanging coffin not far from the white elephant pond. There was only a small hut. It seemed to be His Royal Highness' residence. There was a bamboo fence around the hut. A table and chair were placed in front of the hut. After Su Fengnian and the old Taoist sat down, Hong Shixiang took the initiative to go into the hut and took a simple tea set. He squatted down and made tea. There was no need to guess the old Taoist's identity. He smiled and said, "The world's swordsmanship is divided into standing sword, walking sword and sitting sword. The difficulty increases with each step, but the ultimate achievement is hard to say. Our Wudang sect has never recommended sitting swordsmanship, as it goes against the laws of heaven. However, standing swordsmanship and walking swordsmanship have some experience. I wonder if Your Highness wants to learn standing swordsmanship or walking swordsmanship." Su Fengnian said calmly, "I want to practice my knife." Hong Shixiang, who was making tea, rolled his eyes. The old Taoist said amiably, "Swordsmanship and knife techniques, different paths lead to the same goal. They all pursue the path of one man against 100. Like that Dong Tai, he only held a peach blossom. It can be called a sword or a knife." Su Fengnian did not want to waste time. It was really boring to discuss Tao with the old Taoist. So he asked, "What's the difference between standing sword and walking sword?" The old Taoist chuckled and said, "Standing sword, simply speaking, is when the sword moves and stops more often. The sword momentum is more swift and violent, like the rumbling of winter thunder. Walking sword is heavy and continuous, like the majestic summer rain, like splashing ink." If His Royal Highness likes standing sword, there are a few sets of famous sword techniques on the mountain. Together with Wudong's unique Heart Sutra, the spirit-plucking incantation, they are mutually beneficial. If he prefers walking sword, there is no harm. Jade Pearl Peak has a book called Green Water Pavilion Sword Practice Record for the 60 Years. Its words are exquisite and profound, and it contains the essence of swordsmanship. Su Fengnian thought for a moment and asked, "What does Headmaster Wang mean by sitting sword?" The old Taoist said awkwardly, "This sitting technique is passed down in the Wu family's sword tomb. Outsiders do not know." The young martial granduncle gave each of them a cup of tea. The tea was wild tea from the mountain, and the water was spring water. Su Fengnian drank a mouthful and said with a smile, "I forgot to congratulate Headmaster Wang for coming out of seclusion." The old Taoist smiled and nodded. Hong Shixiang sighed quietly. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment and asked softly, "Did Headmaster Wang really split open that Songlan River with one finger?" The old Taoist shook his head and said, "No." Su Fengnian felt relieved. Since the old Taoist's ranking is lower than Wang Xianji's, then the weakness of his skills is a good thing. Hong Shixiang muttered, it was 2 fingers. Chapter 43. Immortal guiding the way and cutting the river. Kanglan River, that is the largest river in Bailiang. Su Fingnian spat a mouthful of tea on the face of the old Taoist immortal opposite him. The old Taoist priest who had been in Wudang for 30 years just wiped it away gently and turned to glare at his talkative junior brother. Su Fingnian hurriedly apologized. Wang Zhongluo, on the other hand, had a good temper and did not mind, continuing to drink his tea. Su Fingnian quietly sized up this Wudang number 1, his forehead was red like a raised eyebrow. Although he had white hair, he did not look old. Su Fingnian suddenly remembered a Taoist unorthodox book called 3,000 Sceneries that he casually read in the Tide Listening Pavilion when he was young. It mentioned that Wudang had a mysterious internal energy that was refined by the supreme jade elixir. It first formed a Daning, then flowed through the 5 viscera, and then through the 4 limbs. It could turn red blood into white milk, the appearance of a young man, and was impervious to cold and heat. Su Fingnian had never taken the occasional written records of claws in the snow seriously. However, when he heard those 2 fingers with his own ears and saw Wang Zhongluo's vaguely revealed majestic aura, he had no choice but to believe it. The old Taoist left after finishing his tea. Su Fingnian saw Hong Shixiang still squatting on the side in a daze. He frowned and said, "Bull Rider, why aren't you leaving?" Hong Shixiang nodded and slowly walked back to Small Lotus Peak. Passing by the 3 palaces and 6 temples, countless Taoists respectfully called him Grand Marshal Uncle, and he responded to them all. Some familiar juniors would even stop and chat with them. Slowly walking to the Immortal Cliff, he found his senior brother standing under the tortoise camel tablet. Hong Shixiang quickened his pace and called senior brother Wang. Their generation on the mountain was already the highest, unlike Longhu Mountain's Taoist masters who were in seclusion and did not care about worldly affairs. Wudang also had a senior brother surnamed Wang, who used the sword to crown Wudang. He was habitually called Junior Brother Wang by Hong Shixiang, and had been silently comprehending the sword at Big Lotus Peak for 16 years. Wang Zhongluo, who was almost a head taller than Hong Shixiang, turned around and saw the unhappy junior brother. He joked, "Senior brother Chen took away your private stash of forbidden books again." Hong Shixiang shook his head, hesitating to speak. Wang Zhongluo patted his junior brother's shoulder and left under the moonlight. Su Fingnian practiced the rolling knife technique once. There was no set pattern to it. The most important thing was the angle and direction of the first cut. Following that, dozens or even hundreds of moves would follow the momentum of the first cut. Su Fingnian strived to do it in one go without leaving any gaps. Using the least amount of strength to use the fastest knife. This was not something that old man had taught him privately. It was a simple knife technique that Su Fingnian had figured out himself. It was very appropriate to call it a rolling knife. Compared to what Headmaster Wang had said about standing on the sword and moving the sword, it seemed to be slightly different. He returned to the thatched cottage and lay down on a hard plank bed. It was as hard as the Wudang mountain. Su Fingnian had no qualms about this. This was because he was used to living in the wilderness with old Huang. On the table, other than an oil lamp, there were 2 piles of yellowed books. 2 sword manuals, 1 spirit extracting technique, and at the bottom was Qingshui Pavilion sword practice record. Su Fingnian did not have any pajamas. He simply stayed up all night to memorize these books. Wudang's mantra was widely circulated in Jianghu. Most of them were fakes, crowned with the name, Jade Pillar Internal Strength. They were still very popular. However, there were indeed some genuine low-grade Jade Pillar mantras that the Jianghu people were familiar with. Wudang Mountain had never deliberately tried to stop them. This was because the Jade Pillar mantras were indeed brilliant. However, it was only one of the yin-yang fish. It still required the Wudang Taoists to train their bodies day in and day out to complement each other. Su Fingnian was not interested in the sword manuals. He also did not feel that the spirit-extracting technique was beneficial. He only loved the sword practice record so much that he could not put it down. This 60-year sword practice record was the painstaking work of a Wudang ancestor. It was just that the words were obscure and not easy to learn. Su Fengnian looked at the dimly lit sky outside the window. He put down the sword practice record and walked towards the white elephant pond with his embroidered winter saber. The closer he got, the louder the sound of the waterfall hitting the rocks. A cold water vapor assaulted his face. There was a large rock in the middle of the pond. Su Fengnian walked along the edge of the white elephant pond. Unexpectedly, he walked along a bluestone path into the waterfall. It turned out that the hanging Immortal peak where the ivory waterfall hung had been hollowed out by the Wudang ancestors. Legend has it that an Immortal ascended from here and left an ancient sword in the pond. Su Fengnian stood still. He was only 2 arms away from the waterfall. His clothes gradually became wet. Su Fengnian used all his strength to make a horizontal chop with his saber. That old Taoist priest was able to cut off the river with 2 fingers. So what if he used all his strength to make a chop? Su Fengnian felt a piercing pain. The embroidered winter saber had just made contact with the falling waterfall when it flew out of his hand. It drew an awkward arc in the air and fell to the ground. Su Fengnian raised his hand to look. There was a large bloody crack. Su Fengnian grinned. He picked up the embroidered saber that was destined to be buried in his hand for a long time. He let out a long breath and made another chop. The result was the same. Su Fengnian sucked in a cold breath. He tore off a piece of cloth from his body and wrapped it around his hand. He sat on the ground and picked up the embroidered saber. He no longer hoped to make a horizontal chop with his saber. He only hoped that it would not fall out of his hand. He switched to his left hand and made another chop. It was even worse. He fell out of the pond along with his saber. The young martial granduncle came into the cave at some point. He said in surprise, "You're exactly the same as senior apprentice brother Qin when he was young." Su Fengnian tried to find joy in his misery. All experts are like that. Hong Shixiang said softly, "But I heard that senior apprentice brother Qin can make a several-inch wide gap with his sword when he reaches your age." Su Fengnian said in annoyance, "Help me pass a message to the royal palace. There's a white fox face in seclusion there. Tell him to pick 40 to 50 martial arts manuals first and have someone bring them up the mountain." Hong Shixiang asked curiously, "What's that for?" Su Fengnian lowered his head and used his mouth to tie the cloth around his left hand's wound. He ignored Hong Shixiang. The young martial granduncle obediently went out to run errands for His Royal Highness. There's a Purple Sun Temple a mile away. He's going to ask the juniors for help. Of course, martial granduncle won't go down the mountain. A few days later, a slender woman carrying a heavy bag climbed up the mountain with difficulty. What's the heaviest thing in the world? Friendship. Loyalty. Bullshit. Books are the heaviest. Jiang and I sat on a step halfway up the mountain. Her waist was almost broken. A few Taoists who were staring at her swaying body as if she could roll down the mountain at any moment were finally relieved. This extremely beautiful young woman was escorted to the foot of the mountain by the Beiliang cavalry. Then she climbed up the steps alone. At first, the Wudang Taoists wanted to help, but they didn't get any response. She only had a cold expression on her face. The Taoists could only carefully follow behind her, afraid that she would suffer along with her bag. A woman from Beiliang Palace, they can't afford to offend her. Jiang and I raised her head and looked at the endless mountain peak. She muttered something. The Taoists couldn't hear her. It was all harsh words cursing Su Fengnian. But compared to her daily actions of making little grass men, it was already considered gentle. Now if that bastard His Royal Highness dares to stand in front of her, she'll definitely pull out that talisman and die with him. Jiang and I rubbed her already red shoulders. She gritted her teeth and once again carried the heavy bag. In the lapis lazuli world, this was a pitiful scene. Hong Shixiang, who had nothing to do, was strolling around the mountain. He saw this scene and ran over to help. But before he could speak, Jiang and I said, "A good dog doesn't block the way." Her tone was weak, but her eyes were like the eyes of a bodhisattva. She didn't look like a lowly servant in a prince's residence. Hong Shixiang smiled and said, "I'll lead the way for you." Seeing the hut, Jiang and I was stunned. This was the sleeping quarters of His Highness the Thousand-Blade Crown Prince. Won't he jump and curse and kick the few thousand Taoists of Wudong Mountain down the mountain? She sat on the ground, panting. She really felt like she was going to die. Hong Shixiang was just about to remind her, but Jiang and I glared at him. He could only swallow his words. The young martial granduncle thought that the woman brought out by His Royal Highness was different. Or was she really as straightforward as eldest apprentice brother said? Was it because the women at the foot of the mountain were all tigresses? Although his good intentions were treated as ill intent, Hong Shixiang still took the opportunity to lift the bag and move into the hut. This time Jiang and I didn't reprimand him. She really didn't have the energy to do so. Right now, she wanted nothing more than to sit down and fall asleep. As for the pain in her shoulders and back, it was already numb. She just didn't want to touch it. Jiang Ni's back was hit a few times by a hard object. The action wasn't big, but for the current Jiang and I, it was no different from adding oil to a small fire. A thick layer of frost covered the little snow. Jiang and I, who was in extreme pain, turned around with a sobbing tone. She raised her head and saw that repulsive, hateful, and murderous face. She didn't know where she found the strength, but she opened her mouth and bit down, biting His Royal Highness's leg. Su Fingnian used the scabbard to slap Jiang Ni's face, sending this captive princess flying. The strength was just right, not too light nor too heavy, not enough to hurt anyone. Su Fingnian frowned and scolded, "Are you a dog?" Jiang and I, who was more embarrassed than she was in pain, couldn't move. She could only grab the dirt on the ground and throw it at Su Fingnian. Su Fingnian didn't get angry. He only used shudong to slap the dirt back one by one. Jiang and I instantly turned into a little mud man. "Su Fingnian, you won't have a good death. Come, little puppy Jiang and I, bite me to death. You're not human." "Yeah, Jiang and I, you look so fresh right now, so cute. If you have the ability, throw the god talisman at me too. Then I'll consider you ruthless. I'll stab you to death one day. Just now, I'm determined not to fight back. Why are you still sitting on the ground? Little puppy Jiang and I, you can't be so excessive that you want me to stick my neck to the god talisman and slit my own throat, right? This way of dying is too tyrannical. One sitting on the ground, one standing, one crying, one laughing. Who would have thought that these two young men and women of similar age were the eldest princesses of a captive kingdom, the eldest sons of the king of Beiliang? Seeing this scene, the young martial granduncle, who felt that it was harder to understand than the heavenly book, helplessly said, "I'd better go ride an ox." Chapter 44. Su Fingnian was too lazy to stare at Jiang and I. He left her on the ground and went into the room to open his bag. Other than a large luminous pearl and a few sharp Guangdong Liao Wei, the rest of the books were thrown on the table and piled up like a mountain. Looking around, there was the Forbidden Villa's whale-killing sword, the two Zen temples' copy of the Vajra subduing demon fist, and the Southern Sea's largest Buddhist nunnery's Guanyin finger. There was a wide variety of more than 50 martial arts manuals. They all had one thing in common, which was that they were all top-notch moves of various sects and schools. Perhaps there was still a gap between them and the highest level, but for Su Fengnian to master even one of them was a magnificent feat. He didn't move all of them from the Tide Listening Pavilion because he wanted to learn all of them, but because he wanted to pick out one or two suitable ones from each manual. It would be best if he could apply them to his blade technique. Taking 10,000 steps back, if he saw a pig run many times, he wouldn't be surprised even if he saw a pig that could float on water or grass in Jianghu. Just like playing chess, these books were a set of moves. When the opponent placed a piece, he would know the position of the next 3 or 10 moves. No matter how many changes you made, would just kill you with a single strike. Su Fengnian picked up a manual and flipped through a few pages. He put it down and picked up his blade, preparing to go to the White Elephant Pond to practice 600 slashes and 600 strokes. When he went out, he found that Jiang and I hadn't left the mountain yet. She was sitting on a bamboo chair, using her sleeve to wipe the dirt off her face. Her movements were delicate, and each movement must have used all of her strength. How could there be a woman in the world who didn't love beauty? Su Fengnian laughed. "Little mud man, it's going to be dark soon. You don't dare to go down the mountain alone. I'm a kind-hearted person. I'll help you call a handsome little Daoist to go down the mountain with you." Jiang and I sneered. "The Great Pillar State let me stay on Mount Wudong. I heard someone has already gone through the ceremony of becoming an adult. That's hilarious." Su Fengnian felt a headache coming on. Ignoring the mockery of the rootless grass, he frowned and said, "Did Su Xiao take the wrong medicine?" Jiang and I kept a straight face and didn't say anything. She stretched out 2 slender little fingers and slowly combed away the dirt and dust on her hair. Su Fengnian went to the forest to pick some herbs and threw them in front of the house. "You stay here," he said, "I'll go somewhere else." Jiang and I was indifferent. Like a clay bodhisattva, he remained motionless. He tilted his head and didn't even look at His Royal Highness as he meticulously cleaned up the battlefield. She would never touch that huge pile of herbs. Su Fengnian took the night luminescent pearl and the hairpin to the cave of Xianxian Peak. He made a hole in the stone wall and inlaid the night luminescent pearl in it. Suddenly, it was brightly lit. Su Fengnian, whose hands were bleeding, continued to wield his saber. However, he did not dare to cut under the waterfall. Late at night, he was already exhausted. He sat at the foot of the stone wall furthest from the waterfall and slept cross-legged. The saber never left his hand. Early in the morning, he woke up on time. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and saw Hong Xixiang squatting in front of the waterfall, holding water to wash his face. Su Fengnian had always been indifferent to this guy. He got up and practiced his slashing in the open space. While he was practicing his saber in an old-fashioned way, the guy who had been herding cows on the mountain for more than 10 years was studying the priceless heavy thorn wall in front of the stone wall. The round pearl in the bright area was green and translucent. When night fell, it would be as clear as the full moon. The one in front of Hong Xixiang was not known for its large size. The largest night luminescent pearl in the world was still in the imperial palace. It needed 4 16 beauties to surround it. It was placed in the study of Princess Sui Zhu. The reason this emperor's most beloved daughter was called Princess Sui Zhu was because when she was born, Sui offered this huge night luminescent pearl dug out from the foot of Mount Tai as a tribute. Su Fengnian seemed to have had the opportunity to own 2 Sui pearls, as long as he was willing to enter the capital and become the emperor's son-in-law. Su Fengnian did not have the opportunity to know whether the delicious cake was hot or not. In Beiliang Palace, this kind of low-level mistake could not happen because the maids in Wudong Garden were all gentler than the other. However, His Royal Highness was more certain than anyone that the roasted sweet potato was hot to the mouth, hot to the hand, and hot to the heart. The cave was humid and Su Fengnian was sweating profusely. It was very harmful to the body when the sweat mixed together. Su Fengnian did not dare to stay any longer. He carried the embroidered winter saber on his shoulder and picked up the famous Guangdong Liaowei. This was the best quality purple rabbit hair. Rabbit hair was originally a hard hair. The north was stronger, but the Guangdong purple rabbit hair was worthy of being called the first hard hair. This kind of brush was most suitable for writing strong and square characters. The tip of the brush was like an awl and sharp like a knife. This was the real knife of the brush. From a young age, Su Fengnian had been instructed by Li Shan to only use hard hair. The soft and edgeless sheep hair was absolutely not to be touched. The soft and boneless characters had always been spurned by the number one scholar in the prince's residence. However, Su Fengnian knew that sooner or later, he would have to pick up a soft hair when he had to write large characters on a signboard. Although Su Fengnian was scolded for being an idiot with a golden exterior, doing the shady business of buying poems and songs like a poor scholar, he knew the four arts of zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, tea, and wine. It was just that he was not proficient in them. Practicing the saber was a major matter of strength, but practicing calligraphy was a minor matter of strength. It was especially difficult to practice calligraphy after practicing the saber. Su Fengnian dipped the Guangdong Liaowei in water and wrote the incantation for the whale-killing sword on a green rock. The words came from his heart, and the semi-cursive writing on the ground appeared murderous. Hong Shishang squatted to the side and observed. He clicked his tongue in wonder and said, "Good writing, good writing. It's 100 times better than De Shixiang's earthworm crawl." When he communicates with his junior apprentice brothers or people outside the mountain, he has to get me to write for him. Su Fengnian ignored this fellow's praise and chewed on the Guangdong Liaowei brush. Before coming up the mountain, he had practiced the saber painstakingly. However, it was not to the extent that he had to forcefully peel off the calluses that he had honed from 3 years of traveling. Now, his hands were covered in blood every day. When he was not practicing the saber, Su Fengnian would put the embroidered winter saber on his shoulder and swing it around. It looked quite poetic, but Su Fengnian's heart was filled with murderous intent. Chapter 45. Walking towards the thatched cottage, he remembered where he had left the herbs yesterday. Su Fengnian smiled and pushed open the door. He did not see Jiang and I sleeping on the bed at first glance. Had she gone to see the scenery of the lazuli world? When he looked again, he saw that the little mud figurine had already cleaned herself up and was facing the wall, asleep. She did not touch the bed. Su Fengnian understood perfectly that she despised the place he had slept in for being too dirty. The reason why she did not sleep against the wall was clearly because her delicate back could no longer bear any contact after carrying the luggage up the mountain. Su Fengnian opened his mouth and spat out the rabbit hair brush on the table. He used his foot to kick the princess who had fallen from the world's noblest imperial city to the cage of Bailiang Palace and then to this little thatched cottage on the mountain. She was probably exhausted, for she did not react at all. She muttered a few words in her sleep. Su Fengnian did not have to listen to her to know that she was scolding him. Su Fengnian stared at her for a while. She was a budding beauty. Although her face could not compare to white fox's, it did not lose out to sweet potato and blue bird by much. In the future, she would definitely be even more attractive. Su Fengnian felt that the way she sat on the ground and fell into the mud yesterday was very interesting. Jiang Ni's body slanted in her sleep and almost fell to the ground. Su Fengnian's shoulders shook and Shudong fell down. He used the scabbard to gently support her body and slowly straightened it. Only then did he stop disturbing her. When he went out, he saw that the bull-riding fellow had tactfully begun to cook porridge. There were a few small jars of pickled vegetables in the house. During this period of time, unless Grand Marshal Uncle was too busy with the small seal bamboo slips or the precious and unique annotation classic, he would usually cook for His Royal Highness. He worked hard without complaint and enjoyed it. Hong Shixiang cooked the porridge and watched the heat while he dipped his finger in his saliva and flipped through the Book of Rites. Su Fengnian really couldn't figure out how this cowardly fellow could become the person responsible for the black tortoise's resurgence. After leaving 2 bowls of porridge for Jiang and I, Su Fengnian carried his saber and went to the top of the hanging Immortal Peak. The Jiazi sword training was a collection of sword practice experiences, but occasionally, it would also contain some summaries of the vast martial arts. It strongly advocated climbing to the top of the mountain to look at the stars and the sea, which were useless to swordsmanship but beneficial to swordsmanship. Unfortunately, Su Fengnian couldn't find anything that was related to the way of the sword even after looking at it for a long time. The guy riding the bull didn't say a word. He just stood to the side and watched with great interest. Su Fengnian, who felt unbalanced in his heart, asked, "You've been watching it for more than 20 years. Aren't you tired of it?" The young martial granduncle laughed foolishly. The scenery was different every day. How could he be tired of it? Su Fengnian asked curiously, "Do you know any martial arts?" Hong Shixiang said with a face full of sincerity, "I don't think so." Su Fengnian kicked him. The martial granduncle who was squatting on the ground swayed left and right, but he didn't fall. He returned to his original position without any difference. Su Fengnian exclaimed in surprise and asked, "This is..." The martial granduncle who had been on the mountain for more than 20 years indeed hadn't read a single secret manual or touched a single martial art. He scratched the shoulder that was kicked by Su Fengnian and said with an innocent face, "There's a big bell in the Xuanwu Palace. When someone rings the bell, I see how it stops." Su Fengnian wanted to get to the bottom of it. "You figured it out just by looking at it?" The guy riding the bull shook his head and said, "There's no trick." Su Fengnian felt a little defeated and said, "If you use a saber to chop the waterfall, can you chop it?" The martial granduncle who was asked shook his head and said, "Of course not." Su Fengnian finally felt a little better. But the guy squatting on the ground immediately added, "I can't chop it, but it probably won't be enough to make the saber and sword fall out of my hand." Su Fengnian was full of suspicion and ordered, "Then go find a sword and try. If you can't do it, then just wait to be fed to the fish." Hong Shixiang had a troubled expression. "Why don't His Royal Highness lend me the saber on his shoulder?" Su Fengnian lifted his leg and was about to kick, but the martial granduncle who was riding the bull had already run far away. Su Fengnian went down the mountain peak and waited for about 2 hours before a sweaty Hong Shixiang arrived. He really did carry a peachwood 7-star sword in his hand. The way he held the sword was neither fish nor fowl. Su Fengnian signaled with his eyes for him to stab with the sword. As if he was facing a great enemy, Hong Shixiang took a few deep breaths. Only then did he walk in front of the waterfall as if he was going to the execution ground. He raised his arm and swung the sword, lightly stabbing. A mysterious half-arc that slanted downwards, like the horns of an antelope. It cut through the astonishing falling waterfall. Retrieving the peachwood sword, Hong Shixiang turned around and looked at Su Fengnian. There was no smug expression on his face, as if it was a matter of course. Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment, then said with a smile, "I understand. This is your Tao of heaven." Hong Shixiang, who only treated it as a small matter of eating, drinking, defecating and sleeping, let out an awe. He jogged towards His Royal Highness suspiciously in a flattering manner. "Tell me, how is it Tao?" Senior apprentice Brother Qin said that I am in the mountain and do not know the mountain. I will never be able to comprehend the Tao in this lifetime. Su Fengnian said treacherously, "As long as you go down the mountain and stand a little further away, won't you be able to see the mountain clearly?" Hong Shixiang sighed and made a deduction with his fingers, saying helplessly, "I knew it. Today is not the day to go down the mountain." Su Fengnian wanted nothing more than to kick this coward who was hiding in his turtle shell and not poking his head out. Ginger Mud, whose greatest ability was to go down a dead end, decided to go all out with Su Fengnian and live in the thatched hut. From the winter to the warm spring, the flowers bloomed. His Highness the Crown Prince was as tired as a stray dog every day. She had a lot of free time, she did not have to do any of the chores a servant should do. She just strolled around Mount Wudong every day. She walked around the 81 peaks, half of the peaks, palaces, monasteries and heavenly paradises with her little feet wearing hemp shoes. She even had the leisure to ask for some seeds from the nearest Xiang monastery. She planted some vegetables and fruits outside the green bamboo fence. Because of her, she created a small vegetable garden that formed a world of its own. If Su Fengnian took a second look, he would be warned by her, like a little white wildcat whose tail was stepped on. Other than practicing his blade and calligraphy, Su Fengnian also continuously moved books from the tide listening pavilion to the mountain. Book after book, bag after bag. It was like moving a mountain. Chapter 46. Don't forget to bookmark it, there are 2 more chapters today. Jiang and I seemed to be obsessed with watching the fruits and vegetables grow little by little. Whenever she had the time, she would squat in the garden and stare at them. The pitiful talisman dagger had to be used as both a hoe and a hatchet. One day, Su Fengnian went to the garden to fertilize it out of goodwill. In the end, he was discovered by Jiang and I, who couldn't sleep. In a frenzy, she carried the talisman and chased him half the mountain. For the next few days, Su Fengnian didn't dare to return to the thatched cottage. For every meal, he caught some wild animals and barbecued them. At first, Hong Shixiang didn't dare to eat fish and meat. Later, he couldn't stand the gluttonous bug in his stomach. Once he started, he couldn't stop himself. As soon as he saw His Royal Highness, he would throw flirtatious glances at him and ask him what he caught today. This was greatly inconsistent with the rules and regulations of the mountain. Su Fengnian admired himself for being able to endure this bull rider's incessant chatter, just like the gadfly on the bull's butt. After moving hundreds of books up the mountain, Su Fengnian obviously didn't want to be a 2-legged bookcase. When he read something that he didn't understand, he would grab Hong Shixiang and explain it. The most interesting part was that many seemingly unsolvable and brilliant moves often had a solution in another secret manual. This kind of contradiction that required patience to find was most beneficial to Su Fengnian. Now, His Royal Highness' saber skills were hard to say, but his horizons had increased by several levels. During this period of time, Su Fengnian took out a book that had been lost in the Jianghu for a long time, Great Martial Arts, and used it as a body training manual. The moves were simple, but each move was fierce and overbearing, striving to kill with one move. He also asked for a set of nameless fist techniques from Wudong, leaning towards the soft and feminine side. Su Fengnian originally didn't like it, but Hong Shixiang shamelessly recommended it, bragging about it to the heavens, almost praising it as number 1 in the world. In the beginning, Su Fengnian still didn't agree. The thirsty Grand Marshal uncle had no choice but to play a final move. Even Su Fengnian had to admit that he was truly shocked by this fellow. The bull rider plucked a handful of bamboo leaves and casually threw them out in the wind. His body followed the bamboo leaves and stretched out a palm. Su Fengnian only saw his body swaying like a drunkard, jumping around randomly, but all the bamboo leaves were glued back to his palm. Gnawing on a wild pheasant's leg, Su Fengnian, who had obtained the fist technique but still couldn't grasp the gist of it, couldn't help but ask, "The more I practice this fist technique, the more it looks like a sissy's play. You're not deliberately tricking me, are you?" The Grand Marshal uncle wiped the grease at the corner of his mouth and said seriously, "How would I dare to fool His Royal Highness?" Su Fengnian asked suspiciously, "Who created this fist technique?" The Grand Marshal uncle rolled his eyes and swallowed the pheasant meat in large mouthfuls. He laughed dryly and said, "His Royal Highness, I won't disturb your practice. I have to go herd the cows." Su Fengnian pressed the scabbard on Hong Shixiang's shoulder and sneered, "If you don't tell me, I'll beat you until you spit out everything you've eaten." The Grand Marshal uncle said mysteriously, "I accidentally found it on the top floor of the Xianhua Palace. It's been a long time and can't be verified. It must be the painstaking efforts of some senior Jinren." Su Fengnian put away his saber and concentrated his qi in his dantian. He drew 6 circles in the air in accordance with the fist technique, one circle after another. It looked like it, but he always felt that it was several mountains away from the bull rider's wrist technique. Not to mention the spirit, even the shape was barely satisfactory. The Grand Marshal uncle who was busy leading the green cow looked at Su Fengnian's posture and nodded slightly. He smiled brightly and said, "This fist technique goes from the 8 trigrams to the 4 symbols, the 3 powers to the yin and yang, all the way back. It's just that it's still very far from the infinity of Tai Chi. His Royal Highness technique is already quite agile and flexible, opening and closing in an orderly manner. It's not easy and is much faster than I was before. It's just that there are still some small flaws that need to be corrected. If the Great Mound attack is a method of crushing 1,000 pounds with 10,000 pounds, then this fist technique is a trick of 1 or 2,000 pounds. His Royal Highness needs to remember one thing when practicing, the fist technique is to hit the crouching cow. Seek small and not big, seek quietness and not movement. Only then can you obtain the beauty of all things in life. When you reach the peak, you can't add a feather, you can't drop a fly, you can't tell autumn with a single leaf, you can't tell spring with a single sprout." Su Fengnian pondered and sneered, "Only punching a crouching cow is of some use. The rest is all nonsense." Hong Xixiang chuckled and didn't refute. Su Fengnian squinted his eyes and smiled, "Bull rider, you like to eat meat so much. There are a lot of yellow cranes on this mountain, why don't you trick one to come down?" Hong Xixiang laughed dryly, I can't. Wudong's red-crowned cranes are psychic, and they're all my childhood playmates. Killing them is more painful than killing me." Su Fengnian joked, "Can you ride on a crane's back and play? When Taoist immortals ascend to immortality, isn't there a type of crane ascension?" Hong Xixiang shook his head, "I've never thought about that, I've been afraid of heights since I was young." Su Fengnian said with disdain, "Afraid of going down the mountain, afraid of heights, afraid of women, what else are you not afraid of?" Hong Xixiang sighed heavily, frowning and frowning. This bull rider suddenly pricked up his ears, carefully saying, "His Royal Highness, I'll go get the cow first, you better go back to the thatched hut and take a look." Su Fengnian gripped his winter-embroidered saber tightly and rushed back. On the mountain, who would have the guts to find trouble with him? If there was, then it would definitely not be an ordinary character. Seeing the thatched hut, Su Fengnian's figure came to a sudden stop, passing through the bamboo forest and slowly moving forward. Outside the hut, there were 3 unfamiliar uninvited guests, not wearing Wudong's linen or silk Taoist robes. In the middle, there was a delicate young master, wearing luxurious clothes. Su Fengnian was very familiar with Zhong Ming's behavior, he could see the depth of his family's wealth at a glance. The shoe embroidery on this kid's body was extremely skillful, rare and priceless, but this was secondary. In his hands, he was playing with 2 luminous pearls, of excellent quality, known as the Dragon Pearl and the Phoenix Eye. Each was a first-class top-grade toy, but it was even more difficult to put together a pair, the tribute was nothing more than this. Next to the arrogant young master stood 2 middle-aged men. One of them had a big waist, a sturdy body, a standard tiger's beard, a leopard's head, and round eyes. According to Su Fengnian's evaluation, this guy looked like he could suppress ghosts and exorcise evil spirits. This big man had a pair of simple sabers hanging from his waist, one long and one short. He stood a little further away. The other gloomy man with a white face and no beard was closer to the young master, slightly bent, and stood with his hands behind his back. He wore a plain white robe, always giving people the impression of a cold-tailed many-banded kite. Standing in the vegetable garden, Jiang and I stared at the 3 people with red eyes, her lips were already bleeding from her bite. There was a 5-fingered palm mark on her delicate cheek, red and swollen. The vegetable garden that she carefully cultivated had been destroyed, the wooden frame fell, the seedlings were all broken, and it was almost turned upside down. His Highness the Crown Prince had only watered and fertilized the plants out of the kindness of his heart, yet he had been chased down by Jiang and I. Now that the vegetable garden had been reduced to such a state, she must have risked her life to save it. However, her opponents were numerous and they were not merciful people, so she had to suffer in silence. Perhaps in Jiang Ni's eyes, Bailiang Palace was a luxurious and desolate birdcage, but other than His Royal Highness who raised birds, who dared to point fingers at her. Not to mention slapping her face. Su Fengnian, with his hands wrapped in cloth and holding his sabers, walked barefoot towards the three people with a gloomy face. Chapter 47. Jiang and I can bully you, but you can't. I don't care who your father or mother is. The elegant young master slightly tilted his head. There were some freckles on the tip of his nose. He glanced at Su Fengnian who was walking towards him with a look of disdain. When his gaze shifted to the embroidered winter saber in Su Fengnian's left hand, he slowly said, "Oh, this saber is very nice. I like it very much. Go, break his hands. The saber is mine." When the man heard this, he looked at Su Fengnian with a look of pity. From beginning to end, Su Fengnian did not say a single word. 10 steps away from the brawny man, he suddenly rushed forward. The embroidered winter saber was unsheathed. 3 steps away, he chopped out with a clean and crisp saber. The brawny man who originally did not plan to use his saber had a sharp glint in his eyes. Without seeing how he pulled out his saber, he blocked Su Fengnian's swift and fierce saber with the short saber on his left waist. The short saber's handle was wrapped with gold and silver threads. It was an excellent saber that specialized in foot combat. Su Fengnian's saber was blocked, but he did not blindly compete with strength. He used the rebound force to draw a stunning arc. With a turn of his body, he swept out a second saber. The brawny man showed a trace of surprise. He quickly restrained his thoughts of underestimating his opponent. His right foot took half a step back and his left arm swung out like a wheel. He chopped down in the air. He was no longer in a defensive position. He wanted to use his innate strength to sweep away the brat who used a saber in front of him so that he could no longer lift his saber. Su Fengnian, who had long been taught by the white-haired old man when to gather strength and when to counterattack, dodged the saber. He suddenly used an additional 30% of his strength. His speed was close to that of the brawny man's saber. In a flash, he dodged the brawny man's brutal slash. Intentionally or unintentionally, Su Fengnian had incorporated the bull-riding fist technique into his blade technique. His body was like a spinning top, spinning one round after another. His speed did not decrease but instead increased. Combined with the rolling blade technique that he had comprehended himself, it was simply flawless. In the face of danger, he had instantly erupted with a realm that he had never been able to reach before. He had truly managed to do it in one go. His chi was surging endlessly. Su Fengnian's breath was calm and comfortable, so much so that the second shudong sweep was far more imposing than the first. The brawny man who missed his saber glared angrily. This brat did not know when to advance or retreat. His saber was strange and the angle was tricky. It was not easy among his peers. What a waste of his talent. Finally, although he was annoyed, he did not pull out the long saber in his right hand. The short saber in his left hand began to show no mercy. His wrist creaked without warning. Suddenly, the saber appeared and slanted upward. It was as if he had fished out a whale from the East Sea. It suddenly hit the exceptionally bright saber of Xiao Dong. Su Fengnian's alarm clock jumped out for no reason. He subconsciously used all his strength to retreat. A series of small messy arcs appeared under his feet. He finally stabilized his body. He swallowed a mouthful of blood back into his stomach. Xiao Dong in his hand did not tremble at all. The brawny man with 2 sabers was not in a hurry to chase after him. He stood still. The child who said he wanted to break Su Fengnian's hands whispered to the beardless man beside him. Su Fengnian tore off the cloth on his right hand. Xiao Dong turned from left to right. He just stared at the short saber of the brawny man who was probably 3 times the weight of Jiang and I. He clicked his tongue and said, "Good saber. I thought that after the fall of Dongyue, the sabers of the Eastern Yu imperial family that were only used by the Eastern Yu imperial family had been confiscated into the national treasury. The big one was called the man's saber of the Eastern Yu imperial family, and the small one was called the brocade saber of the Eastern Yu imperial family. I never thought that I would be able to see the true faces of these two beauties here." The brawny man with the brocade saber on his waist showed a strange expression. He twitched the corner of his mouth and said, "You have good eyesight." Su Fengnian pretended to be naive and said, "Then aren't you the Eastern Yu imperial family of the fallen country? Why would a stray dog come to Mount Wudong to bite people?" The brawny man who was poked in the ribs was not angry. His calmness and cultivation skills were as outstanding as his saber art. He just said with an expressionless face, "I gave you 10 minutes to rest. Is that enough?" Su Fengnian held Xiaodong in his right hand and did not speak. The freckled child with the tip of his nose said impatiently, "Why are you talking to him? I only want the saber. After cutting off his hands, whether he lives or dies is up to fate." Su Fengnian, whose left hand was covered with blood, unexpectedly lifted the scabbard. Was he afraid that his opponent had 2 sabers and he would be at a disadvantage if he fought with only 1 saber? Seeing this, the Eastern Yu imperial family people sneered. Su Fengnian rushed forward again, rolling his saber like a snowball. His half a year of saber practice was incisive and vivid. The lonely ghost left by the Eastern Yu imperial family easily broke Su Fengnian's unconventional moves one by one. He deliberately waited for the moment when Su Fengnian had to change his qi and killed him. This kind of torture was like holding a saber to the neck but not allowing the person under the saber to exhale. At the moment when Su Fengnian's dantian was exhausted, he resisted the opponent's powerful slash. At the same time, the scabbard in his left hand was thrown out like a heavenly steed soaring across the sky. It shot out like an arrow and went straight to the child's chest. The Eastern Yu imperial family swordsman's eyelids twitched. He turned his head in violation of the taboo of fighting formations to determine whether this damn throw would cause any harm that he could not bear. This was the best opportunity for Su Fengnian to hurt the enemy. However, when he caught a glimpse of the child's right hand from the corner of his eye, Su Fengnian knew that it was not good. He forcibly suppressed the impulse to throw out his saber and retreated again and again. Sure enough, when the Eastern Yu imperial family swordsman turned his head, the saber had already been unsheathed. A 2-foot-deep crack was cut in the mud in front of Su Fengnian. It was a shocking sight. In addition to adjusting his qi, Su Fengnian also looked at the Xiaodong scabbard. The man in white stretched out his arm and gently pinched the scabbard that Su Fengnian was determined to get. It was unknown whether the child was completely unaware of the crisis or he was born with the demeanor of a general. He laughed and said, "You're just an embroidered pillow. Do you want to kill me with such petty tricks? Aren't you afraid of being laughed at? Do you know who these 2 people in front of you are?" Seeing that the Eastern Yu imperial family swordsman had no intention to use his saber, Su Fengnian finally had a chance to take a closer look at the child who had only been freckled by His Royal Highness. He suddenly understood and said with a smile, "Little girl, tell me. Let's see if you can scare me." The child's face turned red. He lifted his leg and kicked the middle-aged man beside him, screaming, "Kill him." The man finally opened his mouth. His voice was sharp and harsh, neither yin nor yang. "You're courting death." Without seeing him move, the Xiaodong scabbard shot towards Su Fengnian's neck like a thunderbolt. The Eastern Yu imperial family swordsman in front of Su Fengnian tipped his toes and made way. If he didn't dodge, he would be pierced by the scabbard. Su Fengnian closed his eyes. He wasn't accepting his fate, but gambling with his life. The wind suddenly rose. Thousands of tall bamboos in His Royal Highness's bamboo forest bent toward the direction of the crowd, forming a worshipping posture. It was exactly the same as the 81 peaks, as if the mysteries of heaven were being drawn. An old Taoist priest floated out, looking indescribably like an immortal. He casually picked up the scabbard and put it down slightly. It happened to fit Su Fengnian's xiu dong into the scabbard. The old Taoist priest calmly stood beside Su Fengnian. The guy dressed as a child but was seen through by Su Fengnian as a woman kicked the man who threw the scabbard and scolded, "Useless thing. Kill. Kill them all for me." The young martial granduncle hiding in the bamboo forest sighed, "This mountain really can't be left. The women at the foot of the mountain are all tigresses.